It happened not too long ago. I remember the hysteria that was developing when we first got word of what it would be. One of the largest hurricanes of all time. It wasn't developing in the southern end near Florida. In the reports leading up to it, everyone remembers recording all of the storms coming towards the northern point of the eastern coast. Some even said that New York would be many feet in water. Droves and droves of people started to move out of the Big Apple, fearing that everything they had would be lost forever. For once in my life, I was very scared for such a large amount of people who were going to feel the wrath of Mother Nature. The news called it the ending hurricane, but the World Meteorological Organization named it Hurricane John, a lousy name for such a movement. I, like so many people, reached out to family and relatives on that coast. I was ushering them to get out as soon as possible to outrun the impending doom. Many listened, but friends doing the same couldn't get their families to move or budge. I kept pushing and prodding, wondering why they would stay, but they couldn't even get an answer out of their own family. Everyone remembers watching the footage from the news of the traffic leaving the city and anywhere near it. The footage that I saw of the churning storm several hundred miles off of the coast moving forward, inching to the demise of such a historic city. Its darkness was shrouded by the speed of the winds and the water covering that hurricane, which kept it like a cloud of death. Then one day, it all stopped. Not the storm, that kept spinning and spinning, but stopped 800 miles off the coast. A bird watching its prey, not far away, but watching nonetheless, knowing it can swallow it in a second, but not quite hungry enough yet. The storms inside of the hurricane got bigger, the thunder got louder, and the lightning strikes got hotter. Meteorologists suggested that the inside of the storm was heating up to over 400 degrees due to the sheer pressure that was cooking inside and not having a chance to escape. The winds were so brutal that every opportunity these companies would try to penetrate through them was thwarted without even touching the outer rim of the hurricane. I started to think about what it would be like to find myself inside of that. Would your skin start to peel and then rip off due to the wind and heat? Maybe it would take a few seconds, maybe a minute. Either way, it wouldn't be too long. Even though the storm halted and wasn't moving toward the city again, no one was going back. People from Florida were now speaking of reports of being able to see it from the southern state, that had darkened the sky even for them. Life went on, and so did the storm. It went on and on for nearly a month, lurking in the heart of the Atlantic Ocean between Europe and America, waiting to pounce. My family in North Carolina was even starting to get worried about it. It was talked about like the first time it had ever happened, a hurricane that doesn't seem to end and doesn't seem to move. One morning, the storm was gone. Newscasts went out in helicopters to get more film of it, and it was gone. But something was in its place. I remember seeing the articles, the questions, and the theories all start to pop up. Where the storm once was, now stands a pale mountain. It was not any type of mountain, but an extremely slim one, with its width growing as it got closer to the sea, then slimming back again at the very bottom. The mountain also stood at the time, which the news thought was nearly 33,000 feet tall, casting a shadow over the world. It bolstered through the clouds, standing against the heavy waves that lapped up against its side. Looking at this thing that made no sense, defied everything that happened in this life. How did it get here? How is it formed in a storm? Was it the heat mixing with moisture? Maybe it created a sort of tectonic plate shift that happened overnight? How are there now major tsunamis or waves that rippled from beneath the sea? All of my buddies started contemplating this anomaly, and we then began to send each other links one after another. From ancient civilizations that left our planet coming back, it could be a peace offering from another galactic force that now knows about us, or a warning message from one. Some even started to think that the hell below the ocean opened up and started pushing this through. It didn't take long for the United States military to start harboring near the mountain, and several of our aircraft carriers started to sail toward it. Russia, China, and other world powers started to do the same. It was as if it were the human front to stand guard against this thing. The newscast showed these massive ships cut through the waves, making their way towards the thing, all looking like ants compared to this thing. Life started to move forward. People started to accept that this thing was here, and it was not moving, stationary as the hurricane was before it. Even though it was on the back of everyone's minds, it was best not to bring it up. It was the world's open secret, something that we couldn't run from, something that towered over us. No one knew its origin, and it could be a million years before we found out what it was. I had called my brother. We grew estranged way back, just to hear his words on the issue. He lived a much more conservative lifestyle than I. He was a religious man. His ideas on it were not clarified, nor did they bring my more rational thinking approach to a calm. He told me that that's life. It's here and we have to deal with it. I asked about his thoughts of a higher power now, but he had no response that made me feel better. It hasn't changed. I told him thanks, hanging up on him before he could say anything. No one had an answer, and that was completely why I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think of anything else. This massive eyesore was stuck in my mind like it was stuck in the Atlantic, and no one wanted to talk about it. I couldn't sleep, I barely could eat, and I was losing myself and watching the news 24/7 trying to get answers. But the news stopped talking about it. Eyes must have left the station once they brought it up, but how? How could anyone turn off the television when that thing was staring at them from the screen? I needed an update on this thing, and I needed it at that moment. My persistent looking and digging brought me to a live stream that was watching it. Day and night, a camera was watching this thing from afar, but it was better than nothing. I needed to have power over it like it had power over me. I needed to know when it would do anything. If it would shift, if it would change, if it would start walking. I needed to be the first one to know. I would watch day and night for 3 days straight. Not an ounce of will left in my body other than to watch this thing. Watch what its next move was and how it was going to execute it. Then it happened. My red-stained eyes saw it, but barely. At this point, I must have seen double, but something was dropping off of this thing. Large rocks that were starting to fall from the top of it. It would knock down more and more. They came crashing into the ocean with splashes that jumped up into the sky. I launched out of my bed and called everyone that I knew. I told them to turn into the channel. I started to freak out. The pieces just wouldn't stop falling. The carriers even started to float away out of the fallen debris. Small chunks, big chunks, all falling over and over, as if the sky was chipping away at this anomaly. Everyone started to think about what was going to be underneath this shroud. What was inside of the rock that was starting to come out. What monstrous entity is going to crawl out of this mountain, coming out of its depths to come to end all of humanity? My glasses hung off the bridge of my nose as I was staring at these chunks landing into the abyss. I then got a text from my friend. It said, "Do you see it?" I pushed my glasses up to my face and waited for my eyes to adjust. I blinked and blinked, the fogginess starting to making out details, until I did see it. The pieces falling from the head of the mountain were by design, because what it started to look like was a face. A nose, cheekbones, and some slits for eyes in the mouth were appearing. I texted back, "Am I crazy or is that a face?" "You are not crazy. That thing has a carved face," he replied. The chunks kept falling from the height and more was being seen. It started trending. The news picked it up. The open secret of the world that everyone tried to forget about for so long was declaring all of its residents' eyes again. The show was not yet over. More and more fell, and more was detailed. The face became more feminine. The top and downward were looking more and more like a veil on her head, draping down onto her arms. Then, without any more, the pieces stopped. Her gaze fell upon the world and ours went up to her. For a moment it felt like the whole world stopped and just had to breathe a collected breath, one that we wouldn't forget. From that day forward, everything changed. I still wish that she had never come here. Whatever she was and whatever sent her to be a message of gentleness or a gift, or a harbinger of evils beyond our comprehension. Many saw it as something else, because I've talked to so many people and so many of those friends and strangers have their own thoughts on this thing. What's the point? What's our purpose? Everyone had a different story or rabbit hole we went down. But one thing stayed consistent no matter what. When you looked at this entity, it always looked like it was staring right at you. Paranoia started routing and moving through the media and minor simpletons like myself. It seemed as if everyone was lost in the clutch of this being's palm, not strong enough to break through her grasp, just all of our souls trapped inside with no one to help. I started to get concerned. I started reading more and more to try to understand anything. History often repeats itself, and for once in my life, I was on my own trying to connect the dots of our past to now. But through my scrounging, I hit more dead ends than I wanted to. I got obsessed with this presence so much that I lost my job. So many people lost their jobs, but it's not a big deal. I then moved over to New York, working part-time here and there. The mass exodus caused a plummet of rent, so it wasn't hard to find a place. The streets were empty. For a town that I had never been to, all I had heard was that it was a bustling city, and the city that never sleeps. But I found that the city was quiet, soulless, and a skeleton of an old king that now lays in its final resting place. I got a spot not far off the Atlantic coast, a small apartment with one bedroom, one bathroom, and one closet, small enough for only a few jackets to fit in. It was undersized, maybe some would consider it tiny, but it was adequate. There was really one window that gazed out towards her, and through my small window I saw it well off the coast. Not particulars, but her silhouette. Today I could only see it up to her chest, then the rest were lost in the clouds, rising up and up. That week, I started to take notes on the woman. I was trying to see what it would do. Will it move one day, or will it shift just slightly, trying to figure out if we even noticed? Can she see us? What was causing it to mold into a woman? Day after day, note after note, I kept writing and writing. I had the news on behind me, while I used a newly acquired old telescope, trying to see when the next chip would happen. The news coverage started to talk about what was happening in Europe, off the western coast of England. There was a video that night of a group of maybe 200 or more people. They were all in darkened cloaks with a veil over their faces. They stood on the shore all in a line, shoulder to shoulder with one another. They all stared at the woman. The woman probably stared back. I got lost in the video. I took my eyes off her, staring at the screen. My eyes were probably reddened at this point. I watched these people all standing with the small waves washing at their feet. The man filming them is just as confused as everyone at home. They all took a step, and then another, and another. They stepped in unison all into the ocean, their wall proving stronger than the waves coming at them. They kept walking past knee-deep, then chest, then to their neck. None of them lost a step in a complete straight line until all of them converged with the water. The only thing left was the lapping waves of the ocean. And beyond that, her horrifying darkened silhouette in the distance. I could only stare, unlike the person filming whose audio was bleeped out every other word by the coverage. I waited and waited for them to rise back up, but nothing broke the surface, not even their veils. I slowly turned back towards the woman, aghast at what I had just witnessed, and noticed that more chippings were falling off of her. It took no more than 2 hours as I watched large pieces fall from the waist area, all plummeting down into the sea, followed by smaller ones as they started to show her slightly outstretched arms. Her long sleeves draped as far below as her knees. Her hands started to get defined, her fingers split in between, and her fingernails accented. She was starting to look remarkable, her face to me now taunting not a smile but a slightly unexpressed face, one that sullied all witnesses, one that immediately made me step away from my scope and turn off the news when it hit HD on my small screen. Why was this thing here? Were ancient beings watching when America received the statue from France and found it to be endearing? Was this an olive branch and they wanted one in return? What was the point? That night, I hadn't slept a wink. I lost my part-time job due to not showing up. I realized what my calling was. It was to be the ultimate witness for her, to write a book about this whole endeavor, for people 1,000 years from now to understand this situation, how it played out, and what the result was for. I understand it all now. This was my calling. That night I went for a walk to clear my head and to debrief before I went headfirst into this path. I was weighing my options and needed to get some fresh air. Madison Avenue used to be a busy street, from what I've been told, but tonight it was completely different, empty and weightless. I could scream and only hear my voice bounce off of the buildings rising higher and higher to escape. I passed some graffiti, which must have been new and must have been quick. It was large, taking up a sizable chunk of the wall. All it read in solid red letters was, "Why did she stop looking at me?" I turned up my collar and continued walking. All I could think about was what this person meant and how they felt. Did they feel relief or grief? I wouldn't know. She still saw me. That night, I had my first episode. I fell asleep staring at her through my window. In the ease of my sleep, I found myself lost in the ocean, under the waves kicking up yet never reaching that break. I wasn't drowning yet, but I wasn't able to move up. In fact, it felt like I was getting slightly dragged down. Then all of a sudden, the waves crashing above me stopped and everything started to calm. The waters all leveled out, and I could see the night sky above. A calmness overtook me as I stopped kicking for a moment. But then the night sky was overtaken by a large grayness as she stood over me, the moon crescenting from around her head as she looked down at me. A pure horror and dread entered my soul, and for the first time I tried swimming down, but now I couldn't move at all. I turned back to her. I screamed. Her face was resting right above the water break, staring at me, her nose an inch above the sea. Her hand entered, splashing mountainous waves through and through as it swung to come to get me. I woke up in a pool of sweat, clutching my shirt, which became another layer of skin in the night. Soon after, I believe that it was a Tuesday, when the first reports came in from Pakistan. A man walked into a rundown mall in the center of Islamabad in a jacket. He walked into a store, I do not recall which one, and took his jacket off. Underneath it was a vest, in his hand a remote. 13 people lost their lives that afternoon. People that knew him said he was completely enveloped by the woman and thought it was a mockery sent from hell itself. That if no one tried to shake the grasp that she had on the world, then sooner or later she would pull every last one of us back down to her resting hole. I guess his idea was to kill himself and others in a showing to maybe take eyes off of her. It didn't. Copycats and other people who were mentally unhinged started to do mass executions, people burning themselves alive. All of it caught on video and spread throughout the world on social media. One video that I saw was a man in the middle of a city, I believe Dallas. He wore a white shirt and in horrible calligraphy said, "She isn't real. None of it is." He screamed to gain more viewers, watchers, and fellow beings before he pulled a pistol out and shot himself under the jaw and through his brain. Screams followed as people ran, but he lay there, and the person filming stayed holding it on his body, his still shaking body on the concrete. He was still alive. At this time, the countries surrounding the woman with their platoons and fleets started to back away. China accused America of propaganda and conspiracized that we came up with this as a means to create a global scare. We started to say the same thing about China. The ships stopped aiming their guns at the woman and started aiming them at each other. The doomsday clock was at 11:59:59. The world was knocking on the nuclear response's door, waiting for them to answer. Germany, Poland, and Israel all started choosing sides and started demanding vocal support from other nations. Tensions were rising, and global policies were wearing thin. It was a sense of desperation that people were feeling, and you could sense it by having everyday interactions. People were starting to stock up on food, buy firearms, and even reinforce valuables. My brother started to reach out to me. I realized that I didn't think he knew that I moved. I was going to call him, but then my phone opened up to a random video. It was at this time that Mary Del Costa came onto everyone's page. If it was through different means of social media or whatever avenue you saw her. Her first video was a hit. It was a 20-second video and it was titled, "I Am Her." She was draped in a long light blue robe, her face with a slight smirk. She stood just how the woman stood. She stood like that for the whole video, a light illuminating from behind her until the video cut out. It wasn't even a few days when she posted again. What was once a video of her all alone, now she was standing in front of a congregation of 20 or more people. Same premise and the same result, but it was a little longer. The people were all on their knees in front of her, and you could see some of them there were crying, not out of a sense of fear or hurt, but a way of love and hope. I saw right through it. This horrible woman was using this life-altering event to cash in and to start a weird faux religious experience. She was all that was wrong with the world right now. I had to dedicate a whole chapter of my book to her and her alone because of what she was doing and how it was evil and lured people looking desperately for answers into her fictitious and malevolent web. All while everything was becoming crazier outside. You couldn't travel a channel or webpage without seeing the warning headlines, or a person speaking in their native tongue about the horrors that people were doing to one another. Bombings, shootings, lootings, arson, and overall anarchy became the new tenets. Neighbors become new people with the same faces. The smell of burned rubber, gas, and other aromas often crept underneath my closed windows, reminding me of the rest of the city. I didn't care for this mnemonic the city often sent me. All I know is if I was smelling it all, then I think she was too. The paper the next day read of a new disease that was spreading through many countries. It was greatly affecting only young children and the elderly. It was so early on that doctors didn't know how to describe it, how it spread, or its origins. The only thing that they could gather was that it didn't strike anywhere except brain function in the respiratory area. After visiting with some of the first couple thousand victims, it was determined that their lungs were not exchanging the proper amount of oxygen intake and carbon dioxide release, that they were holding on to their carbon dioxide. This caused them to have slight symptoms, according to people near them, of light dizziness and drowsiness. They all died in their sleep. The World Health Organization called this disease Omega-1. A meeting was to be held in Washington. The president called on many nations to attend in an attempt to try to find something to ease tensions with our rivals. Several of our allies came, and many of our biggest enemies were now in our backyard. For a little bit, many cameras turned from her and onto the gods of government as they pulled up in our United Nations building. No press was allowed into said event, and many online started to worry that this was all a scheme, a ploy. This woman planted here by all that were in charge, a way to convince people to accept a new world order, that safety was only found through strength in numbers. The meeting lasted hours. When everyone departed, all who were herded inside had faces of the lost. Reports came out of Rome and videos too. A mass movement as many Catholics gathered in and around the Vatican, all holding candles as they walked towards their Holy Land. Priests, men, women, children, a large crowd, yet all of them standing in a complete and utter silence. I wanted to call my brother to see what he thought about the whole event, but it didn't matter. I sent him a text instead, only asking, "What do you think of it all?" Very quickly, he sent me back a text telling me to pray. I never was like him. I was a scientific man, reason over faith. But to each is their own. I just stared at her body through my window. Through that window, I began noticing all of the backed-off military ships were slowly moving closer to her. While they moved closer to her, the clouds around her head started to swirl too. A storm was encroaching around her again. From my telescope, it was a beautiful sight watching the man-made machines and the weather-made spectacle all move in on her. The world was hers once again. The storm started to pick up speed, swirling and swirling. I wasn't able to see her anymore as the day started to die. The storm was perfectly encapsulating her, a cup of horror contained by her proximity. The ships all placed their bright spotlights onto the storm, helicopters and jets flying near it, tracking it for some reason. What was the point of that meeting? What was discussed? That was when the lightning started to strike in the storm. Bright lights, blue, white, and green, struck, followed quickly by the strike of thunder. Barely heard by my apartment window, but must have blown the ears off of the personnel below it on those carriers. The light show went on for what seemed like hours, but could have been minutes. I never thought to check a clock or watch in case I missed something. My hand on my pencil etching words that probably made no sense, while my eyes grew encrusted on the lens of my scope. The strikes became brighter, the horns became louder. That was when we saw it. Through the storm we could see her large silhouette. She seemed bigger in the shadows. More and more came. Then suddenly they stopped for a moment. Then the brightest of them came, and I could hear the screams from across the waters. The lightning sparked the hurricane's walls with the brightest blue. Yet she changed. Her arms were now completely outstretched, and her head hung to the right. I jumped back from my telescope, disoriented as my eyes tried to adjust to the change in depth. The thunder eclipsed the screams as it went dark. I could see no more. The storm raged on, but no more lightning and no more thunder. I stared in awe. I was not able to see her anymore, but the visual was everlasting in my eyes. A pick placed into my brain hidden in the wrinkles, only for me to know where it was seated. I climbed into bed, looking out to the sea, and didn't sleep awake, waiting for the storm to pass so I could see her new structure. The storm passed in the early morning when the sun crossed the horizon and was cut in half by her. Yet her stance stayed the same as before, her arms hovering off of her sides near her waist. She didn't move an inch. Was it a trick of my own eyes? What the hell had happened last night? I didn't drink more than normal. The ships were still near her. As the day brightened, I noticed the departures of several aircraft taking off of the carriers. Every single one of them sent birds up to the skies, so fast that all you could catch was the exhaust trails in the air. Lost and confused, I turned on the channel. Readying myself for the all-call, the horns lifted up in the air as to sound off for the fallout. But what I saw had me lost. There, on a podium outside of the White House, was the president. Well, many presidents, standing shoulder to shoulder behind ours. He was talking about the woman and how, since she has come here, no good has happened. Fear ran amok. People didn't see people, and now the Omega virus has crept into over 74 countries with countless amounts of victims. We must see this anomaly, this unprecedented and horrifying monument, as a harbinger of suffering. I stand here today aligned with many other great leaders, and using our combined military strength to dispose of it quickly and efficiently, so that we can return to life again. That was when I heard the first missile hit. I spun from my television, launching myself towards my window and seeing the explosion off of her left side. Then more came, a storming of missiles and attacks from all points, earth, sea, and sky, all collectively attacking her. She stood tall. She stood strong. As more and more came at her, she didn't have any defense, no shield. They landed hit after hit after hit. She didn't bend or break underneath the fierce hand of man. I turned back to the news, where they were covering her sabotage. I remember that the assault lasted an hour. Punch after punch landed on her. She never showed any sign of wear or tear. When the last missile landed, it was a direct hit on her face. The tiniest crack fell down. From the base of her eye, it trickled just below her cheek. The militaries were most likely stunned, but needing to save some of their artillery, they decided that was enough for today. The attack ended at 9:54 a.m. She stood there afterwards as the air went silent throughout the world. News stations didn't know what to say. The fleet of missiles and attacks barely phased her, nearly everything that we had. It was then noticed by all eastern cities and western cities in Europe that they would be sending nuclear attacks on her in the morning. We should all leave the city at once and expect not to return until all of the fallout is cleaned up. I was never going to leave. This was my story, and I would see it through until the end. That was when she eventually would fall. I messaged my brother my thoughts and explanations as to why I came to this conclusion. He tried getting me out, he tried calling. I answered, but he offered me to stay with him so that I could get back to a normal life. He passed over how his voice sounded, his voice full of sniffles. I asked him about it. He tried turning the conversation back onto me. That is usually how we end the calls. It was not a shouting match, but a game that was at a standstill. Neither of us was going to give ground. I was staying here, he would stay there. I remember drowning all the traffic sounds throughout the day. It would be a long night, one that might even cause my death, but this project was bigger than that. I remember tuning into a live stream of Mary Del Costa. She was praying over hundreds of people now, stating that she would be leaving soon from all of them, that they should repent. I almost threw up at the psyop she was pulling. Del Costa even means off the coast. Can these people not think for themselves? They were witnessing a miracle, and instead turned towards a failed actress? It enraged me to the bone. I drank and drank. Had my alarm set up to 6 a.m. when they collectively decided to send a flurry of nukes at her. I went to bed holding back tears, thinking of what might happen to her, to me, to the world itself. All answers will be revealed in just a few hours. Time was moving ahead as it always does. Everyone held their breath to try to stop it, but to no avail. It marched. I awoke to my alarm chanting in my ear. I arose drowsy and half-blinded. My eyes recalibrated as my vision aligned to the coast. My face would have melted if I had known emotion, but at that moment I forgot everything. The horizon was connected. The sun rose with nothing to cast a shadow. The clouds floated as one, nothing to cut it in half. She was gone. No storm to announce her departure, as she so grandly did to encapsulate her arrival. Nothing. Militaries who were watching her day and night had an answer to it. She was gone and no one knew how, why, or when. Not another missile was launched. The next few days, I gathered all my thoughts, notes, photos, and everything that I had. I started to build my book. It took me a couple of months while still being cooped up in my small apartment nestled over my laptop. After I was done, it was all written up. I sent it to many publishers. Many sent it right back to me. Others took a while to get a message back. Over 30 publishers, and none of them took it. None of them wanted it. They kept telling me that it was insensitive to everyone who was lost due to the Omega virus. Nobody wanted to read about something that we all witnessed and that we all wanted to forget. That people just wanted to move on with their lives and never think of it again. I sat there, reading these messages over and over again, with a printed 400-page manuscript and nowhere to send it to. I was astounded. All my work, all my hibernation, all my purpose was to be forgotten in the wind with no one to care or want to read it. I became lost. I didn't know what to do. I started to take to the bottle more and more. Days blended into weeks and weeks trickled and flowed to months. My brother became a victim of the virus soon after. and softly departed us. His funeral didn't have many visitors. The world, like I, had become a shell of itself. I saw it through the screen and could hear it through my window. Something felt off, like it had become darker and sadder. Even some days felt worthless. Lawlessness started growing and taking over nations. Riots ran the streets. I started to drink a lot more. I couldn't even look out the window that I grew to only know, the one where I saw her, because there was no one to look back at me. The Times Person of the Year ended up being her, with the tagline, "Why did she come? Where did she go?" There was a dedicated slot for all that was lost to the sickness, millions upon millions. Seeing her on the cover told me one thing, though, that people did care, that people wanted to read up on her, just that they didn't want to read it through me. All I could think of through this is how her leaving made me feel left behind. I always wondered who else felt the same way, but was always too afraid to ask anyone that I passed. I write this, half drunk, to whoever will read it, as a summary of what I thought my life's work was. As I sit on the floor in my closet, is to throw away on a message board to be lost as soon as others write on top of it. I sit here in silence, the door closed. With the chance she does come back, there would be no way for her to see me and what I have become. My town had a food drive every year called Help Feed Bobby by Trey Blosky. My hometown was an odd place. We had a video store that never had the movies I wanted, a convenience store whose slushy machine was always broken, and a yearly food drive with a weird name. Help Feed Bobby. If you're thinking, who's Bobby? Then you had something in common with my 10-year-old self, every other kid in town, and the people just passing through during the time the food drive was active. We did ask our parents, teachers, and basically any adult why it was called that, but the standard answer was that Bobby was just meant to represent children whose parents couldn't afford food regularly. The other one was that Bobby is meant to be an acronym, but when pressed on what BOBBY is supposed to spell out, they always found a way to stop or change the conversation. For the longest time, the most information we received was that at the end of the drive, some people would volunteer to take all the donated food to its intended destination, and then, around the same time the following year, it would start all over again. One day, my dad came home and told my mom and me that he was going to have to go out next Saturday, as he had volunteered to help deliver the donated food to its recipients. I tried to ask him where the food was going and if I could go with him, but he shot both questions down with, "Sorry, sport, grown-ups only." I wanted to know so badly that I came up with a plan. On the day he was supposed to deliver the food, my dad came home with a truck full of donation boxes. As sneakily as I could, I snuck into the back of the truck, emptied the contents of one of the boxes, and ducked down inside. I realized that the chances of being caught were high, but I didn't care. I wanted to see where all this food went every year. After about an hour, I heard the truck start and felt it move. I wanted to poke my head out and see, but I knew my dad could just check the rearview mirror and spot me. Another possible 3 hours, and I felt the truck come to a stop. I heard my dad get out of his truck, and some other volunteers getting out of their cars. I couldn't really hear the conversation at the time. I did feel someone grabbing the box I was in. "Damn, what's in this? Watermelons and ham?" He continued to grumble as he carried the box somewhere I couldn't see. It was maybe 45 minutes before he finally placed the box down. I got excited. I would finally see where the food went to. I waited until I didn't hear any more footsteps before I exited the box and started to look around. It was a large cavern. I saw what I presumed was the entrance. The place was lit by what I assumed were battery-operated lights, with boxes of donated food stacked everywhere. Looking out on the other side, I saw a cliff edge. Walking to it, I looked over the edge. I don't know how deep it went. I just knew it was the size of a football stadium. I kept thinking to myself, what was the point of this food drive? Why bring all the food to some cave? And for the 1,000th time, who is Bobby? I felt the rumbling before I heard it. Then I saw the cavern begin to shake violently. Looking down, I saw something begin to emerge from the darkness. It looked like the beginning of a bright orange beak. From there, a head only slightly smaller than the hole itself took form. Imagine if a turtle's head were covered in spikes, and you'd have the beginning of what its head looked like. It stopped at about 15 feet from the top of the cliff edge and began to open its large beak. I was paralyzed with fear. I didn't know what this thing was going to do. For all I knew, it was about to breathe fire or grab me with some kind of frog tongue. But it just stayed there, like it was waiting for something. That's when I realized this was Bobby. This thing came up here. It knows someone will feed it, because it's been fed every year for God knows how long. And this was only the head and neck of it. I couldn't fathom how big the rest of Bobby could be. My fascination/horror was cut short by the sounds of my dad and the other volunteers coming back down the cave path. I ran back over to the box I was hiding in, but realized they would probably start with that one, so I went to a stack of them near the entrance and crouched down next to it. My plan was once they all walked past, I was gonna run back up and hide in my dad's truck. The voices and footsteps became audible as my dad and the other volunteers returned. Okay, that should be the last of it. Then we get a break for another year. I wish we could just cover everything in cyanide. Nice wish. There's not enough poison on the planet for that. Then I heard my dad, he sounded nervous. Even if it worked, how do we know that the body wouldn't stink up the whole town? Wait! I see its head! Then I heard my dad's first time seeing Bobby. Jesus Christ. I could hear the terror in my dad's voice. I almost wanted to run out of hiding and go hug him, let him know I saw it too, and he wasn't alone in his fear, but I knew that could make things bad for both of us. Another volunteer disregarded my dad's terror and nonchalantly remarked, "Let's get started. Just grab a box and throw it at the thing's mouth." I watched as they all started grabbing boxes and taking them to the edge. When it looked like all of their backs were turned, I quietly snuck to the entrance and ran back up to the mouth of the cave. From there, I saw my dad's truck and made my way to the back. A few weeks later, I was at the library trying to see if there was any more information about Bobby. I should have expected my town wouldn't keep records about a giant turtle monster living underneath it. But what was there was still helpful. The monster was most likely named after the town founder, Bobby Robertson, and during times of famine, the town was prone to tremors. It was nearly destroyed during the Great Depression by a sudden magnitude 3 earthquake. My guess is that the townsfolk of the town decided they needed the food more than Bobby, and he voiced his disapproval. I don't think my dad ever figured out that I was there with him that night, but I made it a point to spend more time with him, though I had to pretend that I wasn't also scared of turtles now. The next year, he did not volunteer to assist with help feed Bobby. In fact, he had gotten a promotion at work, and we had to move away because of it. So for the past 22 years, I was able to let help feed Bobby slowly fade into my memories. Until a few days ago, when I was struck by nostalgia for my old hometown, so I started looking into what had happened since we moved. My hometown doesn't exist anymore. At some point in 2005, the town collapsed and sunk into the ground. The official explanation was that there were multiple caves under the town, and a long overdue mass cave-in had finally happened. It was harder to find any more information on what the town was like before the cave-in, but the most relevant piece I found came from a Facebook group for it. I learned that new people had replaced the previous town council in 2004, and in the same year, they voted to end the Help Feed Bobby food drive. Have you heard of the Golden Boar cult? Yesterday, my grandma Bonnie sent me a text message to say, "Happy belated birthday, my grandson." Her message was about a week late, but this isn't too unusual. She's always been late. In fact, like most people my age, I've never had much of a relationship with my grandmother. She's from an older generation where family is everything, yet emotional availability is a weakness, or something like that. Personally, I've never understood her, and I don't think anyone in my family ever has. Bonnie is my dad's mother. There weren't many stories about her growing up. Bonnie is more of a go along to get along kind of person. She wasn't the main character of anyone's childhood stories. Kids need something? They just ask their father, my Grandpa Melvin, who's always been the resourceful kind in any situation. Actually, I'm not even sure how or why Grandpa Melvin married her. He's such a larger-than-life character. He's the cool dad who every adolescent boy dreams their dad was. Then there's Bonnie, who for the most part lingers around like a ghost in the background. Around the holidays, Bonnie was always the last to send holiday cards, and always late to birthday parties. Maybe it's her intention, but no one pays her much mind. She always keeps to herself, for the most part. All I've known about Bonnie was that her father, Great-Grandpa Jack, was a wealthy veteran. Something about him being a high-ranking Air Force general. Anytime Bonnie's name is mentioned in conversations, my dad always says, "Oh, you know your Great-Grandpa Jack was a pretty important man, don't you?" Then someone asks, "Oh, really? How important?" To which my dad always responds with, "Grandpa Jack briefed the president on confidential matters and attended his dinner parties. That's how important." great-grandpa Jack passed away before I could ever meet him, but I always heard stories about him. Jack passed January 3rd while I was born February 3rd. My mom used to joke that Jack couldn't handle hell, so he crawled back into the land of the living through me to finish paying his dues. The only connection I ever had with my grandma Bonnie was when she'd show me all these medals and governmental correspondences that were signed by powerful men that Grandpa Jack saved during his time in the military. To be honest, it never really piqued my interest. What the hell did I care? As a kid, all that ever interested me was when my favorite shows were on and getting home from school to cool down with some boxed juice and crackers. Anyway, getting back to the text my grandma sent me. All of this kind of hit me when I saw her message. Call it a grandson's guilt, but I felt the need to try and open up to her a little now that I'm older and more mature. I've been thinking, maybe I'm the chosen one, and I can crack the case on this strange woman. We've been texting back and forth, and I'm very interested in what I can get out of her. It's been a few days since my first entry. My grandma Bonnie was so happy to hear from me that we've made a habit of texting each other. I guess now would be the time to mention that I live across the US from where my family lives, so meeting my grandma or any of them isn't feasible. Instead, I asked her if she wanted to call me so we could talk over the phone, but she declined. She told me she doesn't trust her voice being cataloged onto a database somewhere. At first, that made me laugh. What the hell does she mean by that? But as our correspondences continued, I learned that most of her instincts came from her father and things he'd tell her while she was growing up. It sounds like great-grandpa Jack impressed a lot onto her, especially since Bonnie never knew her mother, something I asked her more about. No one knows who Grandma Bonnie's mother is. My family always told me that she disappeared by Bonnie's 3rd birthday. All we know is her name was Eva, though Jack insisted that might not be her actual name. My mom would always whisper about what a tragedy this was. It's why we all let Bonnie be Bonnie. Aloof, stoic, and isolated to her own little world. No one ever blamed my grandma for not being around much. We all figured it came from a place of abandonment. My dad said Grandpa Melvin never discussed Bonnie's family in front of anyone. It was something she didn't want anyone to mention. Dad said that she never told him anything outside of how important Grandpa Jack was. Luckily, Dad was alive to hear Jack's stories from his own mouth. Learning this made me consider how intimate it was that Bonnie shared Grandpa Jack's memorabilia with me when I was a kid. I called my dad up about all of this. To my surprise, he had no idea that Bonnie showed me Jack's medals. He sounded shocked and a bit offended, saying that his mom never even let him in the same room as the keepsakes. Your grandma didn't like telling us about any of that. We heard it all from Jack, and that was fine enough. Your Auntie Lorraine was the most interested in the mystery of your grandma, but Bonnie wouldn't have it. It took a while of convincing, but sometime after your auntie graduated high school, I think Mom had a stern talking to her, because Lorraine finally dropped it and never mentioned it again. This was all very enlightening to me, and if I'm honest, it made me feel really special that my grandma felt comfortable enough to share those things with me in confidence. To think that she never even shared Jack's honors with her own children. What's that all about? Bonnie was a loving, supporting mother, I hear. Why was that a bridge too far? It's not like she hated her kids or anything. My family isn't special or anything. I mean, really, who knows anything about their family at all? For example, I felt like I knew my dad really well. I can tell you where he grew up, the names of the woman he dated before he found my mom, which jobs he held, and even what songs played on the radio when he was my age. Yet I couldn't tell you how shocked I was that my dad never mentioned much about his relationship to Grandma Bonnie, or that I was the only one granted clearance into Jack's private artifacts that her kids were forbid from even mentioning. How much do I actually know? Well, there's only one way to find out, and that's to ask my grandma, who seems to quietly have the keys to our family's secrets. It's been almost a week since my last update, but I thought I'd get this down before I forget. So, as laid out in my previous entry, I decided to inquire further to see if there was anything else my grandma was willing to share. At first, our conversations remained fairly mundane. She was telling me about her day. She'd been seeing a doctor about a hip replacement, so her messages slowed down at first. Skipping all that, I asked her about Auntie Lorraine, who was really interested in our family. The following messages were kinda weird. I'll share them as she sent them. Did Lorraine or your father ever tell you about what happened to your Uncle Robert and his love affair with an evil woman named Inez King? Of course your father wouldn't say anything to you. We told him Robert joined the Air Force and ran off with that wicked woman. Your father tries to be a good boy and keep his nose clean, but he knows we hid things from him. We taught him to be good like that. I'm sure you heard about your uncle. He was everything your father wasn't. This made me uneasy to read. For background, my Uncle Robert, or Bob as my dad calls him, is the eldest. My grandparents had 3 kids, Uncle Bob, Auntie Lorraine, and Jonathan, my dad. Uncle Bob disappeared when I was around 7 years old. He was a lot like Grandpa Melvin, funny, outspoken, and warm. My dad used to tell stories of Bob torturing him and Lorraine when they were kids, mostly playing elaborate pranks on them to inspire fear. My dad told me that Bob was a bad apple, but the kind of bad apple that's really fun to get drunk with after a bad breakup. He'd light the town on fire and blame the man for those sins. I tried to ask my dad about Bob's disappearance, even reading him the strange text message Bonnie sent me. My dad got really quiet, something I'm not used to, and told me he'd call me back. It's been 3 days, and I haven't heard back. I think I struck a nerve. Maybe it wasn't a good idea to read verbatim what Bonnie sent. He wasn't meant to hear it. It was meant for me. Since Dad proved a dead end, I decided to look up this name, Inez King, within Paradise, the small town my family grew up in. After hours of searching, nothing came up. I almost retired my search, but as fate would have it, I had local TV on in the background to soothe me, and a commercial came on. It mentioned a car dealership that's a town over that happens to have the same name as the city my great-grandpa Jack was originally from. Anyway, I remember hearing that Uncle Bob moved to a place with that name after he graduated high school to start a life of his own. This also happens to be the town where Jack was stationed at the beginning of his Air Force training. This town is kind of notorious for a lot of organized crime, murders, and disappearances. So for that reason, I'm redacting all names and information that could give it away. It's really not something I want to shine a light onto in regards to my family history. So I searched Inez King within that zip code and a lot came up. I was sent to a lot of old archive websites. After all, this used to be a major tourist town back in the day. It was upsetting to find two headlines that read, "Satanic Rituals, Cult of Young Women Who Kill for Satan," and "Daughter of Local Mayor Inez King, Tragic Car Accident Goes Unsolved." The articles were themselves very old. You can call them vintage, actually. The first article mentions an Inez, though with no last name. Apparently there was a private school that operated in this town. There was a back door to a satanic cult. Or that's what the journalist suspects. Here's an excerpt from the article. For decades, this private school has remained a mystery within the hearts and minds of Redacted County. Started in 1888, Redacted, for young girls founded by Dr. Redacted, has been opened to house the daughters of legacy families from around the state. No one is clear on the details of their operation due to their exclusivity and militant policy around matters of privacy. Many have claimed it's one of the first all-girls school of its kind to operate in the United States, right here in our humble little town of Redacted. Rumors of Saturday night parties in which young girls gather to sacrifice livestock to Satan has followed this school since its grand opening, raising suspicions from local residents. The school declined to comment on these accusations. Local youth, Redacted, from Redacted, claims to have seen such a horrid night of shenanigans unfold before him. He describes, "One evening, I was on my way home when I heard screaming, but it didn't sound like a human. At first I thought it was a baby, but it shrieked in a way you only hear in the movies. The shriek was coming from the woods. I was so startled, my heart nearly launched out of my chest, so I decided to investigate. That's when I saw a circle of people in purple robes around a fire pit. They were rocking back. One of them was holding a goat that thrashed and screamed for its life. This person then beheaded it in front of a boar's skull. It was painted gold with red jewels for eyes. They let the blood fall into this lead bucket. I saw them all dip their hands into it and smear the blood all over their faces. It was pretty dark out, a new moon. I didn't get a good look at them, but they were definitely teen girls who seemed to think it was funny. I felt so nauseous and quickly got out of Dodge. Luckily, they didn't see me, but I'm pretty certain it was from the girls' school. After some investigative work, I learned the name of one of these girls who goes to Redacted. Her name is Miss Inez, last name unknown. She's a young 13-year-old girl. One can only imagine she comes from a line of wealth and luxury to get into this very exclusive private school. I attempted to track her down to ask questions, but I couldn't. Soon after my revelation of the young girl's name, I was followed by unmarked black cars and harassed by a barrage of unknown phone calls. There's more to this article, but I only wanted to share the juicy details. I learned this journalist was very well respected in the area and helped police solve a bunch of cases throughout the years. Unfortunately, he killed himself about a month after he broke this satanic school story. According to his late daughter, he struggled with alcoholism, and he only got worse. She was convinced his demons finally caught up with him after he published that story. The harassment that followed was too much for him. The second story mentions Inez King by name. This is where I learned she was the daughter of the then mayor. The article talks about her untimely death at age 22, a night of partying gone wrong. Breaking. Miss Inez King, 22-year-old daughter of Mayor Redacted King, was pronounced dead at 7:17 a.m. this morning, found brutally mangled in a ditch, from what police say was a car accident. One of the last people to speak to Inez King was her 27-year-old boyfriend, Mr. Robert Redacted, a handsome young Air Force pilot. Mr. Redacted recounts Miss King insisted upon attending her Saturday night sorority party in the Zeta Alpha Zeta house. The following morning, a good Samaritan who wishes to remain anonymous alerted authorities to the scene of the crash between Wexler and Donovan Way. Police found the young beauty queen's body left in a gruesome scene, her body severed clean in half and her neck snapped in an unnatural manner. Onlookers say her internals were laid about everywhere for anyone to see, with her heart oddly missing. Police claim there is no suspected foul play. They suspect this is a classic case of drunk driving and bad luck during a darkened new moon night. Mayor King requested no comment at this time. However, his offices released an official statement mourning the loss of his daughter and need for privacy and prayer. There have been conflicting stories as to the night before the incident. Miss King's sorority sisters inform us that she was taken home by an unknown man and was not alone in that car. There are currently no suspects or further leads. Someone could argue with me that the Inez in the first article, who was 13 years old at the time, isn't the Inez King I'm looking for. However, after reading both articles and seeing my Uncle Bob mentioned, I know both articles are talking about the same Inez King I've been searching for. I wasn't too sure what can of worms I opened. At this point, I was too nervous to send this information to my dad. Did he know my uncle's name was in this old story about his early girlfriend's tragic death? Probably not. I've never heard of Inez King. Clearly, she was an important person. The text between Bonnie and I have been less. She says she's been taking time to recover from her hip surgery that she got recently. Also, my dad hasn't gotten back to me at all. I think I pissed him off or something. He refuses to answer my calls or text back. Even my mom is avoiding me, so I gave up trying to contact them. I'm sure whatever it is, they'll get over it. Fortunately, I was able to ask my grandma a bit more about this Inez King situation, to which she responded, "Inez was a devil woman. She slaughtered helpless animals to get what she wanted. She took your uncle away from us and paid a price." Have you heard of the website? Redacted. Type in the date of Inez's death, and you'll find what you're looking for, I promise you. Be good, grandson. Just to be safe, I redacted the name of the website. It might be one of the last websites known to contain malicious pop-ups from a bygone era. I'm not taking any chances. Shocking. I didn't know my grandma knew how to navigate a search engine at all. Her recommending a website to me was wild. Anyway, I found what she was talking about. It looks like some secret governmental archive website. Or at least I've never heard of it, maybe it isn't secret. When I typed in the date of Inez's death, a whole database of PDFs came up. It looked like Inez was linked to several disappearances before her death, many men who she was involved with all vanishing. Not only that, but her father, Mayor King, had 12 wives. Every single one of them died from a slew of unfortunate circumstances. His first wife jumped off a bridge, the second died of pneumonia, and so on. What does that mean? I don't think that's normal, but who am I to say? Another PDF was a scan of an old handbook with a very detailed cover titled Signature of the Golden Boar, which immediately reminded me of the young boy who saw a goat sacrifice in front of a golden boar head. One of the first pages of the handbook had a ritual schedule of important celebrations. Turns out Monday, Loktos, Tuesday, Sangam, and Saturday, Grossis, were very significant days for this boar's head group. Unlike our holidays, they didn't really have any set days throughout the year. It just says, guidance will be given. This gave me the impression of a very tight-knit group that regularly met. Otherwise, how would they know? What really caught my eye was the strange statement page on their core philosophy that described who they were and what they were about. Secrets are to remain currency under order of Abraxos. The blood of your wounds granted you access to the binding words within this document after you were courted by signature a priori on Crossis. My child, we welcome you with open arms into your final chapter. Brothers and sisters, the signature of the Golden Boar is an exclusive club that's a part of a wider network of heads. Anyone reading this has been given access into our dwellings and rights. Congratulations. We believe there to be no God nor divine force in this world aside from power. Therefore, the whole of our law is to do and be what you may through strength. In a world of wickedness and evil where no higher power is found, we make power and give only our organization founded by Father Abraxos. Every feast held is a sacred rite to channel the darkness of this world into empowering yourself or your signature within this life. We believe only the most exclusive throughout humanity's history is worthy enough to wield this mighty sword and take these oaths. Only those tougher than lead can forge their own sword of conquest, to cut down their own path, leaving only his signature. We find that you are one of these people. Pity is an illusion. We win solely on strength. Lie to the weak, for they are the magnet of wickedness. Take no pity on those unworthy, for they will pluck your eyes out and feed it to the vermin of the earth, because only you hold the sword. This was more confusing than I was hoping for, yet I found myself agreeing with their statement to a degree. Then again, that's how they get you, right? How did this document end up in this database? Was this the club Inez was a part of? The rest of the document was in code with strange drawings of animal dissections, seemingly with a critical focus on the heads of these animals. The drawings of the heads demonstrated careful detail to removing the eyes, the nose, the teeth, and even the brain. The animals depicted were a goat, a river dolphin, a dog, and a bird that I've never seen before. The other drawings were somehow more graphic, showing the proper way to dismember and blend together the rest of the animal into a meal, and how to organize that out on a table. The table itself was a layout of a human body, and they drew each piece of an animal placed neatly where you'd expect to find it on your body, but reversed. The table was rectangular. You had the diagram of the human drawn over it upside down. For instance, there was a cow brain in a bowl with a lunar symbol drawn above it placed at the lower hem of the table, rather than having it at the top. To be honest, I was getting a little sick looking at all of this. And as you'd expect, there was a drawing of a boar implicated in all of these step-by-step guides. It was drawn smiling, like a mischievous cartoon character that felt unsettling given the subject matter. The fact I couldn't read it was upsetting. I'm sure they did that on purpose, so the uninitiated would be lost if they happened to find this. My mind was swirling with what kind of implications this had, not only on my missing uncle, but on a larger scale. Did Mayor King know about this? I messaged my grandma with the name of the group, the signature of the golden boar. It didn't take long for her to respond with an image. I'm still taken aback by this, but it was an image of one of Great-Grandpa Jack's Air Force patches. It was a black patch with a yellow boar's head, smiling and winking with the number 717 in red stitching under it. I remembered her showing me this patch when I was a kid. Some of the patches he had looked pretty standard, not all that interesting, but that one immediately came running back to me. I'd be lying if I said seeing that patch didn't bother me. Actually, the idea of thinking about it any further fills me with butterflies. I decided to leave that as is for now. She sent a message after the image. It said, "I assume you looked into King's father and the mess with his school, right?" So, that's where I am now, currently looking into this Mayor King character since any search of my uncle turns up nothing. It's now been a day and a half since my last update. It wasn't hard to find information on Mayor King. He was their mayor for almost a decade. Politically, he was pretty standard, yet people knew him and kept electing him out of habit, despite their suspicions of money laundering. Those claims were unfounded to my research, but I'll admit I quickly lost interest looking into that. The lead my grandma sent me wasn't as explosive as I'd hoped. I found the university Mr. King graduated from. He was a privileged frat boy that was involved with all things politics from the get-go. A little coincidental, but not crazy. However, the university's mascot was, you guessed it, a golden boar. I say was because they changed it 5 years ago to a peacock, which is quite a change if you ask me. Is that enough to say he was involved with this shadowy group, too? Hard to say, but it does look really suspicious. Obviously, any search for this signature of the Golden Boar group turned up absolutely nothing. As far as the internet is concerned, it never existed. Not even the PDF I found came up. I tried to look into any symbolism on the boar or a golden boar. There wasn't much. The boar is a wild pig. They're very powerful, secretive, and aggressive. Sometimes they eat other animals. Then there's how genetically similar we humans are to pigs. I assume this organization is trying to embody a powerful, undomesticated boar rather than a domesticated pig, which is probably us ordinary people. The implications of that sends a shiver up my spine the longer I sit on it. It was my grandma who thought to text me while I was looking into all of this. She said, "So you found their signature. Where do you think they received money from?" When your uncle was going through his training, he told me he was invited to these fancy dinners every Friday night, hosted by the city. He never said what for. Food for thought. Stay safe. I really feel like I'm coming close to solving this mystery. Yet something tells me that I may not be happy with the answer. Not because it's not satisfying, but because of what it means. There is an organization called Betterment of Academic Research, or BOR, that's helped fund many of these more private universities for decades, including Mayor King's University that his daughter was attending. The founder of this organization is Timothy M. Gold, who is also the founder of Engaging Aerial Training, or EAT, a group that advocates for young men to join the Air Force. They're actually very successful in what they do. Tim Gold is known to be a very wealthy and mysterious man, connected to all sorts of academic and military organizations throughout the United States. Sadly, Tim Gold passed away 7 years ago from a heart attack, so there's no way to contact him anymore. My grandma mentioned that Great-Grandpa Jack always wanted one of his grandsons to follow in his footsteps. It happened to be my uncle who stepped up. She said Jack knew Tim Gold. They were in the same fraternity and graduated college together. In fact, Bonnie texted me a photo of the whole family with Tim Gold, handing a young Bob a certificate after his high school graduation. Everyone was in the image. Bonnie, Melvin, Bob, Lorraine, and my dad, with this Tim Gold. She sent me a few others of Tim attending other events throughout my family's life. He was everywhere. He was an older gentleman like Grandpa Jack. He wore these large gold-rimmed aviators with these gold rings on his fingers. In a strange way, he felt so familiar to me, like I had seen him before. It turns out, Tim Gold was the man who took my Uncle Bob under his wing, helping him get into the Air Force, among other things, Bonnie said. She wasn't specific on what that meant. My mind was blown. How had I never heard about any of this? Dad never mentioned a wealthy benefactor who was really close to our family. No one mentioned it. Was that normal to not mention? Then there's these strange connections with the signature of the Golden Boar. Tim Gold is the one person who's the connective tissue to all of this. Yet there's hardly any information about him outside of fundraisers, and a few events where you can find his name signed on a registry. All of this happened so long ago. The internet doesn't really hold any info on stuff like this. My grandma then sent me a text saying, Mr. Gold was friends with the King family too. He would take your uncle to those private dinner parties that Inez loved so much. Everything kind of hit me at once as I read that. I had this horrible feeling in my gut that my uncle was somehow involved with Inez King's death, and that might have something to do with his disappearance. I have no way of proving it, but the more I think about all the hints she's been giving me, the more I think that's what she's saying. Today began in an ordinary fashion. I was ready to get another text from my grandma to finally get some solid answers, until I received a text message from an unknown number. It said, Jamie, is this your phone? This is your Grandma Bonnie. We've been trying to get a hold of you. Quickly, I called the unknown number, and my grandma answered. It was her. I mentioned to her we had been talking for a good month or so. She sounded really confused and said, No, Jamie. My phone was disconnected over a year ago. Your grandpa bought me this phone a couple of days ago, and we've been trying to get a hold of you to let you know. My world was spinning. I had to sit down for a moment as the breath was knocked out of my lungs. Something wasn't adding up. There's no way. She apologized about not texting me a happy birthday this year, which added to my heart race. I felt a wave of hot air rush to my head as this sudden Twilight Zone reality punched me in the gut. Honestly, I was unable to play this casual game of small talk like nothing had happened. The question on my mind tumbled out of my mouth. What's the signature of the Golden Boar? My grandma's mood shifted so fast. She went quiet on the other line for almost a minute as I felt the weight of the question I just asked. The air was heavy, with something unsettling swirling around the white noise of the phone call. It terrified me. Her voice was distant when she finally responded. You shouldn't know about them. Cicada Bells by Samuel Geist. Forward. Generally, an author's foreword may be regarded as a bit pretentious, depending on the circumstances of the story. For a fictional story, it would be almost appropriate. Thank you to my daughter Cindy for keeping her imagination open. Thank you to my wife for the countless cups of black coffee. Barry James Patterson. For a non-fictional one, it might be a bit of a whining sheet, I think. Oh, woe is me, the stress of collecting public information and formatting it into several hundred paragraphs has taken my sanity from me, kind of a thing. I haven't done so many of these, as my other collections of events and testimonies have spoken mostly for themselves, depending on how much historical context I sneak in the introduction. I do this because I love the mystery, the intrigue of the campfire-esque quality these accounts and journals exhibit. Whether or not I believe in them, it doesn't matter. There's just something I think should be heard in them, that's all. This time, I thought maybe it'd be a nice piece to set the right tone for this particular account. My name is Sam, and my last name is Geist. I worked for 3 years in the Ribbons County Library as an archivist, and I never went to college. I don't sleep a lot, but mostly because I think it's sort of fun. This story comes from a moldy old file box I found tucked away in a mop closet in the Ribbons County Public Library. I remember it was a late night when I had caught myself digging through the piles of papers and manila folders. Finally, after hauling it all down the smoke-stained hallway and into my office, I had flipped through 5 or 6 papers before the box yielded a stale yellow packet. As the text pressed into the front page indicated, I was looking at a report and affidavit from the Ribbons County Police Department. It was bare bones, just enough to get across that Mr. Thornhill had suffered from harassment and intimidation from somebody or, in hindsight, something, on the night of October 30th of 1976. Mr. Thornhill, joined by his wife and son, had only moved to a shabby little den a mile from town the day before. Apparently, it hadn't taken long for the town's strange side to peek into their lives. Nothing appeared to come of it initially, just a small report in the bottom of a file box. Curiosity must have gotten the better of me, as I couldn't help but ask around the sheriff's office come morning. It was purely a hunch, but it had been so long since I found the pool house journals, and I was hungry for another spooky story. I got an address from the ever-sweet Miss Collins at the front counter, and found myself driving to the burbs somewhere in the evening. I found the new Thornhill residence there, with a solemn old man greeting me at the door. Mr. Thornhill hadn't been who I imagined, being more bookish-looking than the men I was accustomed to seeing around town. Not a hint of stubble on his face, a pair of pristine black glasses on the crook of his nose, and his snow-white hair combed to the side as if it had never left the 60s. He had me at the table within 5 minutes, shooting off notes about his grandson and his batting average on the Wombats Little League team that season. It seemed a shameful thing in retrospect to blindside him with a report. Mr. Thornhill clamped up as the question sprung from me, and I was afraid he'd shut down and throw me out. Maybe I hit the right note, but he didn't shut the door on me completely. Instead, he asked that I give him time to write. This was strange, as I'd never met a subject of my posts before, let alone been offered a written account from the horse's mouth. A week after, I received a call and excitedly came by a second time to pick up a hefty few pages from Mr. Thornhill's own hand. That night, I read them until the sun came up. I happen to live in the woods just a few miles west of the location talked about in the report. And after reading the packet in its entirety, I've never looked at those trees the same. Between the double-wide trailers and the outskirts of the burbs, when asphalt roads turn to dirt ones, I feel it there when the sun gets low. When it's dark, when the moon comes up over the tops of the pines, there's a tinge of hell there now. I'll always look twice when I see a sewer drain, or even a simple office vent. I can feel it every time I look there into the ink-colored space between every branch. And this testimony is the reason that childhood fear of the night has crept back into my life. Here's to hoping that the years after poor Mr. Thornhill's terrible weekend vanquished whatever set on him those nights in '76. Hoping that maybe my uneasiness in those wooded hills is just a memory of a memory. Samuel Geist, documentarian and professional sweaty library nerd. The following is Mr. Thornhill's own writing, his own account. Please, consider it carefully, and with a hint of grace fit for an old, honest man. I think the best place to start would be the crash. We were 15 miles out from Winewick, I think. It's hard to remember. What comes back to my mind was the road. God, the dirt and rocks kicking up and smacking the undercarriage kept the car constantly loud. The forest on either side was like two walls of green. No gap went over a foot without another huge pine growing behind the first. My wife sat in the passenger side of the grisly old Chevy pickup while my son sat in the back behind me. Initially, it was supposed to have been a nice little drive on a local road to the new house, something her mother had mentioned on the phone yesterday. She thought it'd be nice, and Janice was in a big hurry to feel as local as possible, though I was in no hurry at all. I mean, the boys started at the elementary school the next day, and I still hadn't figured out what bus to get him on. She hadn't found a job, and I wouldn't be starting work at the firm in Portland for another 4 days. I was scared shitless that we were playing stupid with the entire thing, and that this had all been a big mistake. Shit, I'm not too sure where I stand on it even now. But her mother had told her about the scenic little road that cuts into town from just past Eugene, and she didn't want to come in feeling like a tourist. But I humored her, as I always do. She always smiles so much when I play into the cute little ideas she gets, and I'm a sucker for it every time. That's who she married. An idiot. Maybe the road wasn't so bad. Maybe I'm just being a big Nancy about the whole thing. But it was loud before we found it. That's when I saw the taillights straight out down that road, staring back through our windshield like eyes in the dark. The dust and dirt kicked up by our tires danced in the beam of our headlights as I slowed our 35 miles per hour to a 10. The vehicle didn't move, and the beam of the yellow light trickled down the rocks as we slowly crept forward. That's when the rusted back bumper slunk out of the dark, and the bed of the truck followed it, till the vague frame of the cab was just beyond visible. I'd stopped, and Janice had lightly punched my knee, kicking her head up and gesturing to the truck. Keep in mind, I'd already been at my wit's end 10 miles back where we'd come, so I didn't take the assignment without what amounted to a few angry grunts. Needless to say, I hesitantly opened the door to the Chevy and heard her turn and distract our son, who was excitedly stirring now that he noticed we'd stopped the drive. As she asked him for a game of rock, paper, scissors, I felt myself nervously retucking the waist of my shirt under the belt as I shut the door and took a first few steps toward the truck. The brush was buzzing with crickets as I neared the bed of the truck, and the sun had now completed its descent back behind the horizon. I was startled, sure, but not expecting any trouble in the small walk to the window of the truck. I picked up speed and reached the driver's side before stepping back. I saw the tree first, still standing strong with the lip of the hood curled and bent around its trunk like a piece of tinfoil. I saw the front of the frame run mangled up to the windshield, which had burst into 1,000 shards of speckled glass. I leaned in, my breath held in the back of my throat as I made out the outline of a figure in the front seat. The brim of his cap hung sideways against the steering wheel, while the meat surrounding the head was clinging wetly to a huge stone. A man was inside, dead. His arms hung limp around the rock. His fingers were still tight and curled around the sides of it like they'd failed to pull it off of his chest. Bits of slimy red matter dripped down onto the collar of his denim jacket, turning the blue into a horrible dark purple. I saw that his shirt had been torn out. Ribbons of shredded flannel lightly covered a large hole in his breast. The skin had been gutted, and a circle of teeth marks took my mind to scary places, as did the strange yellow mucus oozing around the wound. Maybe I felt sick. I don't remember. What I do, though, is gripping the handle of my car door tightly before jumping in and letting out that bated breath. Janice turned to me like I'd asked her to find the TV remote, but must have gauged the situation better than I expected when she lightly ran an arm around the width of my shoulders. She asked what was wrong, and I told her that we needed the police as soon as possible. Maybe she thought I was joking, but when she let out a chuckle in disbelief, I slammed my hand down on the wheel hard. We were getting the police as soon as we got to town. We were getting the hell out of Dodge. She leaned back to her corner on the passenger side and told my son that everything was all right. He wasn't listening, though. I peered at him through the side mirror and saw his face pressed against his window, fog growing where his mouth met the glass. All three of us sat there quiet while the engine purred, my wife shooting me a look before we heard him pipe up from the back seat. "Slinky Man, Mommy! Look, look! The Slinky Man!" Neither of us spoke, but we shared a confused smirk before she reached back and clicked his seatbelt back into its slot. I started the car and bent the gas down till the debris on the road kicked up and pelted the bottom of the vehicle at a decibel unheard of before. I do realize now that that was the first sign of things to come. I can't pull out all the specifics from under the fluorescent bulbs in that tiny police station, but I remember Sheriff Grant and company being the kind of guys I'd only seen in spaghetti westerns. The sheriff himself was shorter, but his arms were packed with the kind of muscle that you only see in a farmer or a prison inmate. I remember a scar running down the length of his neck and a handlebar mustache that could have fit perfectly on a Hell's Angel. There were few words in between my details from the crash, just a yes sir, and a no sir, and a down on Links Road. They'd asked what the truck looked like, if I could describe the man's features at all. I told them they'd be hard-pressed to do so themselves if they'd seen how Rock and Face had become one in the driver's seat of that beat-up pickup truck. Any idea where the stone came from? What the hell am I supposed to say? I have no idea. So we gave them what we could, and judging by the bags hung under Grant's eyes, I don't think he was happy to have to run out to that boony road and haul the vehicle back to town at 1:45. Who could blame him? You coming by for the fishing, or are you on your way out to Portland? I explained that we were moving into a place in town. It was on Harrison Trail. Grant kind of scoffed, but not in a bad way. He just raised an eyebrow and finished writing down the information I'd given him. Gonna be a lot of fun out there, fella. You were... I told him my name was Ferris, and asked what he meant. Shoot, Ferris. You got yourself settled into a far little branch of town. It's a bit out there. Might be the only house I can think of for a few miles in either direction. The deputy spoke up from his place at the water cooler. Nah, the Clark Castle is out a little further that way. The sheriff brushed at his mustache. Oh yeah, yes sir, that'd be your only neighbor. Don't expect to borrow any sugar though. That place has been boarded up since I was a kid. I asked why he thought I'd be having a lot of fun, and I heard the deputy laugh through his paper cup as he shut an office door behind him. Well, that patch of ground has been neat for kids to explore and make spooky stories out of is all. Not just the kids though, I guess. It started 10 or so years ago when an old man was out fishing and caught sight of the big guy. He must have noticed my crooked brow, because he patted me on the shoulder as he stood and held the door to his office open for me. It's nothing at all, Ferris, just a story. Besides, it's not something people are scared of. They want to see him. Nobody's ever been in my office screaming about Bigfoot killing their dog or something. It's just a fun little story for kids and old-timers. I asked him if maybe he knew what happened to the last tenants out there, or maybe the Clark Castle, but the sheriff didn't really remember. The den we'd moved into wasn't really on his radar, but it was probably a place yuppies had owned as a summer vacation home. The Clark Castle, though, he said, was an old story. Not a particularly thrilling one. Just a big house built and left alone sometime in the 30s. I remember rambling off a couple Spitfire questions as he led me back to the lobby, a reassuring smile on his face and a pat on the back. Janice and Shane were there waiting for me. Shane's little head bustled into his mother's lap as he snored away. Janice held her head against the shoulder of the lobby chair, her own snores coming in soft and quiet. I woke them both, ushering them out the door with a gentle hand as I turned back to Grant, who called, "You're all invited to dinner at mine on Sunday. If you're willing, I mean. It'd be a nice way to pull out the welcome mat." I thanked him. Off we went then, out down a list of boulevards and streets I had to follow from a map made of red looping lines on a green landscape. In the dark, I'll add. Grant hadn't been joking about the run from this dingy old double wide to the heart of town. We must have gone through 13 miles of green, mountainous hell before I pulled the brake out of a large cattle gate. I stepped out and got my key inside the lock, swinging the chain to the side and letting the gate creak open with an eerie screech. I pulled the car in and let the family out at the porch of our new country kingdom. Crickets and moths plagued the yard, the latter diving into my cheeks and forehead as I held little Shane in my arms and carried him inside. Janice had a bag tucked under her arm that she set aside as we shut the door behind us, and I let her set out to the bedroom while I got Shane in his pajamas. He would sleep with us that night, and I was relieved that at the very least the trailer had come furnished. A dusty floral couch and a Sears catalog dining table awaited us inside. The floor was shag, and I eyed suspicious black lumps that dotted the corners, having a hunch we'd walked into a roach graveyard. The bed was thankfully new, being a housewarming gift from Janice's mother. I had hardly a glance at it before I saw my pajama-clad wife slip beneath the covers and slide off into dreamland. Shane followed after, toothpaste foam still sticking to the corners of his mouth as he nuzzled in with her. I remember that as I flicked off that light switch, I saw the whole world fast asleep under those big, plush blankets. But I also remember the sweet and blissful taste of tobacco smoke as it danced against my tongue and slipped through my nostrils in a big cloud. Maybe I had promised to quit, but a couple Marlboros weren't gonna hurt anyone. Besides, the relief of being alone with something that was truly only mine was beautiful after a day like that. And then, under the blanket of stars, I found a small moment of peace. My dad had smoked too. He's passed a long time now, but back then the tumors had only just found purchase in his lungs. He's been a resident in a facility since before Janice and I had gotten married. I hadn't visited him much. Shit, I wouldn't let Shane even grace him with a hello on the phone. Some things are best to be said in only a few words, and those are these. I wasn't terribly fond of my father. He was bad at being a parent, he was a drunk, and he'd wasted his life without me anywhere near him. I'd been terrified at the time, as the move got closer and closer, that maybe the man in the mirror I saw every day was starting to look a bit too much like his dad. I was only a year into the practice, but this firm was very well regarded, and I was nervous that I'd gone and moved us out here just to fumble the ball. In Arizona, I would handle public intoxication cases or small claims, but here, I would be getting in an army that I wasn't so sure I was suited for. It was in those minutes outside, watching the smoke twist and swing through the air, that I noticed that the crickets had stopped chirping. I didn't know how long I'd stood there in the quiet, but the realization hit me, and I felt the thoughts of my father slip away. It felt darker out there. Without the breeze rustling the leaves together, the air almost felt weighted. I was alone, I was sure. So why could I hear someone breathing? It was there, not close, not within 10 feet, but past the patchy grass and the fence line, I could hear it. Deep, soft breaths. They were hasty, and even though they weren't next to me, I thought I could hear the wet tongue of something lashing in its mouth. I didn't finish that cigarette. Instead, I stood there and watched the black at the edge of the porch light, waiting to hear a pin drop. Maybe if I got a flashlight, I could catch whatever it was. Maybe it was a stray dog? Then the thoughts got worse. What if it was a bigger animal? I wouldn't want a mountain lion or a bobcat getting familiar with a property with Shane around. I turned slowly, but didn't dampen my steps. I was tired and stressed and ready to toss a rock at a dog's ass if it meant I could head to bed and get some sleep without worrying even more. I opened the front door and stepped inside. In the saddlebag by the fridge, I had a small silver flashlight, packed in case the power wasn't on by the time we were ready to move in. Next to it, unbeknownst to me, was an empty box. Like the idiot I was, I kicked it while getting at the bag and slipped on the shag carpet. I fell like a sack of grain onto the floor and felt my head knock into the edge of the kitchen counter. Stars danced around my head, and I angrily got up and dug into the bag. Finding this stupid little light, I kicked the box into the living room and swore I was going to burn it. I opened the door and looked out there again, but the light slipped from my hand and bounced off the wooden slats with a clunk. Hanging from the banister below the porch roof was a snake. I nearly cursed, jumping back before letting the fact of the thing settle in. The snake was dead, its long, slender body wrapped in a snug knot around the wooden beam. Its pattern shone a string of diamonds down its back, and I looked up at the rattle as it hung down from the knot. Its yellow eyes were wide and hollow, its mouth open and fangs showing like knives under the porch light. It swung limply, as if it had only been stuck there a second before. The hairs on my arms stood on end, and I waited there like it might wake up and reach for me. But it didn't. Looking around, I saw nothing in the dark. And looking back now, the only reason I didn't switch on that flashlight and get a good look at that fence line was because I didn't want to see what was hiding in the dark. I grabbed the thing and undid the loop around the banister before turning inside and burying the snake beneath a pile of newspaper and tucking it in that damn empty box. I placed it next to the trash can and stepped back, my body frozen. Maybe it was the storm of tasks I'd have on my hands tomorrow, and maybe the drive had left me exhausted. But I refused to think about the snake longer than it took to walk over to the bedroom door and shut it behind me. I just couldn't take another straw on the back of that camel. Now, these years later, I know that I was truly the idiot I painted myself to be in my head. It was the snake that should have tipped me off. A diamondback strung up and tied to the porch like a big red sign on the highway. Stop! Don't go further! Turn back. Now I see the intent of it. It said, I'm here and can be as close as I want to be. When morning came, it was a sunrise greeted by my agitated yelling and whining. I'd overslept by an hour or two and had to ready Shane in whatever clothes I could find and run out to the car in my boxers and a t-shirt. I got lost in a patch of houses at some point of the drive, but we reached the school around 10 a.m. The poor kid had to hold his father's hand in the school lobby as I explained the situation to the ladies in the front office. Other kids on their way to class pointed and chuckled at the funny old man standing in his underwear. I tried to make a joke out of it, but I'm not sure he thought it was very funny. He still waved back as he set off to his second grade classroom, but I'm sure he was beyond embarrassed. Walking back to the car, I locked eyes with anybody who dared stare. A dad's got to do what a dad's got to do. Unfortunately, Janice didn't seem to find it nearly as funny. When I got back, she was deeply annoyed to know her husband had embarrassed us as a family unit in front of the elementary school faculty, which I found even more funny in my delirious morning brain. Maybe I'd been a little too cynical when I spoke back. Hell, it hurts no one to admit it now. I was an outright asshole. Looking back, I should have asked her not to leave. But the arguments had come like machine gun fire leading up to the move, and I know she was doing her best to tolerate me. It turned into a screaming match before either of us had even started a pot of coffee. In my hazy memory, I remember her looking so beautiful with her hair in a bun, mouth curled into a snarl as she spat back at her know-it-all husband. If I could be there now, I would have slugged myself in the mouth and screamed at him to kiss her. Tell her you're just scared. But stoic heroes depend on silent jabs to fight their battles, not explanations. At the time, I was nearly at the end of my rope. I had just 3 days before I was due in Portland, and I just spent a whole 24 hours in a car with a stream of questions flurrying out of her and Shane's mouths, and I was just tired. Tired of the failure I was sure I'd be in the office. Tired of the faces that depended on me looking back in mine with such blind confidence. Blissful ignorance to the tightrope we were walking all together, stupidly led by the clown at the front. Me. She said she was going to her mother's, and that she'd pick up Shane tonight with her. She didn't want to be around me anymore with how much attitude I'd been pouring out the past few weeks, and I don't blame her. I sat at the tacky dining room table, staring at my feet as she showered and dressed, and packed a small bag. Figure it out, Ferris. We want to be happy here. Please, figure it out. And then she left. I must have stayed on that porch for almost 4 hours after watching the car pull out of the driveway and through the gate. I felt the sun boil the surface of the yard as it slowly dripped down the face of the sky. By the time the afternoon had ended, I'd been heaving breaths through a wet pipe. Going cigarette after cigarette had mucked up my stomach and lungs, and I feigned ignorance to it as I pulled another one out. I was bored and hopeless, and felt a lot like I was the sorriest bastard on the planet. I saw the sun near the tops of the trees, and stared out at the end of the yard as the blue deepened into a soft purple. I must have figured that I needed a distraction, and with the air cooling down to a nice 70 degrees in the sun's wake, how could I not take advantage? It was the perfect time for a pity walk. So I set out on our dusty road opposite of town and further into the trees. Wasn't this what it was for? Trees and animals and good, clean air, peace of mind and love for the in-between. A place you could really relax and retire, even. But between the trunks of the trees and the water bubbling somewhere out there, fast and low into some crystalline pool, I didn't find any peace. All I could sense were the shambling, lazy footsteps of one moron trouncing through the brush. An arrow of large birds flew up above the green in a wide V, and I watched them go. The animals cawed and tweeted all around, seemingly unaware of my footsteps on the gravel. That would be around the time I noticed an old wooden post stuck into the shoulder of the path up ahead. I followed the jagged, rusty barbed wire strung between it and another post, and then another. The fence line led haggardly to a huge mass of growing vines and branches, arced over a sun-bleached gate. The white paint turned yellow and faded long ago. The latch rusted into the wood like candle wax melting against glass, and I looked through the overgrowth to try and peek at what could be beyond. It wasn't doing any good. What I assume were garden vines and bushes had long exploded into their own microcosm of green and completely engulfed the yard, keeping the property a secret from anything behind its gate. In an act bathed in childlike curiosity, I figured, of course, that I wouldn't let this old rose garden get the better of me. I smashed the rusty latch with a rock and pushed the gate open. The arms and neck were victim to what felt like hundreds of tiny scratches as I stretched through the tangled web of branches. The worst of it gave way with a little more effort than I thought reasonable, and I stumbled out of the thicket and onto a small stone path. Looking up, the looming face of a faded blue house stared down at me. The crest of the roof bent inward like the dip in the McDonald's sign, a large crack running down the length of it until it tapered off at the front doors. I shielded my eyes from a beam of sunlight that shone through the stained glass in the windows, and strolled forward towards the doors. I curiously reached for these shiny little clumps that dangled from the old gourd vines that climbed the face of the house. Hundreds of thin, insect-shaped shells clung to the vines, spotting the wall like Christmas lights. My grandmother called them cicada bells, the crunchy old skin the little bastards leave behind when they molt. The air was thick and humid. A scent like old bile traveled from somewhere close, and I suddenly felt like I was in a movie. My shirt stuck to my skin and the back of my neck felt like a small flame had been lit against. I was even more excited to step around the side of the house and see that the back wall had completely given way, a massive pile of old bricks climbing up in a heap. Strips of old sheets swung from the banisters beneath the top floor, jutting out like the exposed ribs of roadkill. They swung in the light breeze lazily, dancing above a blanket of forgotten junk on the ground. The empty living room and kitchen sat exposed to the forest like the enclosure of a zoo. I studied the sun-bleached array of old chipped china and furniture. Several chairs and a love seat stood like they hadn't moved since they were brought in, the plush seats having been torn and nested in by rats and squirrels. In all of the memories that stood there in the Clark Castle, I felt a sense of dread. I saw all of it as a testament to time, to something inevitable. I know now that I should have left then, with that sorrow in my heart and shaken it off with a nice long sleep in my own bed. But standing against the moldy wallpaper of the kitchen wall was a floral patterned crib. The finish on the wooden cage had been tarnished and worn away, and it splintered at the joints. An army of soggy vintage children's toys were gathered around the legs, staring up at me like I had interrupted a meeting. A yellow substance stuck like paper mache to the heads and arms of each toy, and dried streams of it dripped down the cradle bars. Toy soldiers stood with teddy bears, and the beady button eyes on all of them made the flame on my neck burn hotter. From where I stood on the cracked foundation of the home, I could see just past the cradle slats. I could see something peeking from the lip of the tattered pink blanket inside. A smooth, round object rested against a tiny old pillow. The sunken divots below the bulbous dome stared back at me, and I knew what I was looking at. I didn't want to be there anymore. I turned tail under a blanket of red sky. The sun finally muzzled behind the mountains in the west and leaving a crimson tarp in its wake. I must have taken the wrong step somewhere in that bolt, and I felt my foot get latched under a large root, and I tripped over and down a decline and rolled towards a ravine. I don't remember the fall well, but I remember the cuts across my temple and the feeling of hot blood rushing down the side of my cranium. When I'd slid into a stop at the bottom, I felt rocks and wet leaves swallow my hands and shoulders, the pain in my head distracting me from what I'd come to realize was a twisted ankle and a couple jammed fingers. This was the least of my worries. As my eyes refocused, my nose was immediately burnt with the thick, sweet smell of swamp and rot. I focused, my breaths deep and getting frantic. I stumbled to my feet and looked down to see the ruptured and broken body of a stag, face pointing at my own. The horns had been snapped and thrown somewhere to the side, and the legs were broken and tugged into disgusting angles. The head faced me, twisted around at a jagged tilt with its mouth open and tongue swollen. I stared down at the shoulder blades of the corpse and saw several palm-sized divots carved from its back, pounds of flesh missing between the teeth-marked circumference. The back half of its body was sheltered in the mouth of a large sewer outlet, swallowed by the dark inside. I saw a thick, yellow syrup spill out from beneath the deer in a stream, dripping down onto the rocks below. I cursed, holding my hand to my head and marveling at the carnage in front of me. I had no idea there'd be animals out here that could do this. I thought back to the noises from the night before and shuddered to think that there might have been a mountain lion or a bear lurking between the pines, watching me as I sat on the porch. The same animal that could be right there with me. I wasted no time digging my Converse into the side of the hill and pulling myself back up to the ruin, speeding off and away from the Clark Castle. I smacked and pulled my way through the brush and let the odd thorns pull and tear at my skin as I breached the other side, feeling some sort of presence at my back. I felt the history of those old bones standing in the shape of a dilapidated house grow behind me, standing like the Colossus of Rhodes with a patchwork graveyard at its feet. My eyes weren't playing tricks on me. Even in the twilight haze, I knew what I saw behind the bars of that cradle, tucked like a sleeping child beneath an infant's blanket. The body left rotting in the pine needles, the smell still wafting into my nostrils and curling my stomach as the rotted blood and viscera soaked into my clothes. I would call the sheriff, get a whole load of deputies in that old shack. That's what I'd do. They'd call animal control. Shit, maybe they'd get the National Guard to gun down whatever lived in there. I'd leave the little skeleton in the nursery to them. They'd know what to do. And when the familiar outline of my double-wide trailer showed against the shadow at the end of the road, and I pounded the soles of my shoes against gravel to reach the cattle gate, that's exactly what I intended to do. At least until I stepped onto the porch and noticed that the front door was wide open. I put one foot in front of the other, slow and deliberately quiet. The carpet swallowed the bottoms of my bloody shoes as I pulled both arms back in a boxer's position. I must have looked terrifying enough, hair matted and clothes stained red. I hope just the sight of me would at least make a mountain lion pause long enough for me to run outside and lock the door once I'd identified the intruder. The house was dark. A weird energy was silently clouding the place. When I breathed, I could feel it fill my lungs and fly through my veins. My spine felt like concrete. I wanted to scream. I was a grown man in my own home, scared like a child. I reached for a large kitchen knife from an open box of cooking utensils sitting by the door. Sword in hand, I braced myself as I stepped through the living room and into the hallway. A small noise bled softly out of the dark somewhere down the hall. Velvet consonants in open air, so small you'd think they were a child's. My hair stood up on end as the whispers joined vowels and articulate words were pieced together in my mind. Blee, blee, blee. Big sheep on black hills all go chewing. I stared down the hall at the open bedroom door, knowing that someone was in my home now, and I was pissed with myself for not thinking to have brought my 9mm out of my walk, instead leaving it in the safe next to the bed. I was going to come down on this man like Muhammad Ali in a tight corner. Huey was only rough playing, Helen. The whispers sung wet from the back of its throat, like tears would follow soon after. I put my weight on my back foot as I crept closer to the doorway. Huey didn't mean to make you break, little baby. I stood now before the vast dark space. In the shadow, the moon painted the walls a soft blue. I can still see it there, standing with its back towards me at the end of the bed. I said nothing, but it turned, shoulders low and its spindly frame twisted to let its eyes meet me in the dark. A stray beam of moonlight spilled onto its cheek. I saw the light green of its pupils meet my gaze, a white face under short, soaking locks of black hair. A layer of oily film was pasted on its white cheeks. Its neck arched. It was a man, I think. The body of it was too shaded to make out any detail. Not that I could get past its stare anyway. I stared into the pale green eyes stabbing through the dark like tiny jade rings. The face around it was pale and hairless. Its nose was small and its lips were parted in an O. I felt my heart freeze when words sputtered out of its mouth and drifted into my ears. Oh, hello, Crow. I hesitated, sure, but only to rear my arm back and launch the knife immediately toward the thing, the metallic glint shining in a streak against the bright moonlight. The thing bent back and I watched as it effortlessly dodged the blade with an unnatural stretch before scuttling away and pulling itself out of the room through the open bedroom window. I watched its feet plant against the windowsill and grip the wood before letting go and slipping out into the night. I stood there in silence, my heart beating in my chest like the engine of a freight train. I stared out the open window, past the dark branches silhouetted against the bright moon. The wind picked up outside, whistling against pine needles in the trees. My thoughts were faster than my brain could handle, and fresh sweat drifted down my forehead and over the congealed blood dried against my cheek. At my feet was one of Shane's toys, a Stretch Armstrong newly splattered with gunk where the thing had held it in its arms. Coming to my senses, I jumped at the safe, quickly fumbling with the dial and feverishly grabbing my 9mm and a box of bullets beside it. I strode into the living room, slapping at every light switch on the way, and sitting down at the table to load the gun. With the barrel loaded and the weight of it safely reassuring my hand, I felt the breaths come back slow. I was okay. Everything was okay. The bastard wasn't a robber. Just a weirdo who broke in and touched my son's toys, that's all. I kicked one of the other chairs over in anger, the day's hell having finally rested in my head, and the fury building up inside. One breath passed, then another. I had no phone. It wouldn't be set up till the next afternoon. I had no car. Janice had taken it. Thank God Janice and Shane were far away, safely out of reach of this place. But that left me to deal with it. Then I heard a sound on the roof. First there was one, then another, and then a constant stream. Constant metallic ping sounds bouncing off the roof. I wiped at my face, then pulled back the hammer on the hand cannon before getting up to the door and swinging it open. The cold air swam at me like a wave, and the door smacked against the inside with a bang. With the silver barrel of the gun pointed ahead of me, I stepped out onto the yellow-lit porch. The noises on top of the roof had stopped, but so had the crickets. Now the vague scream of cicadas howled from somewhere in the forest. I watched the dark, seeing nothing in the yard. Then I looked down. A single solid bar of metal lay at my feet. The face of it was dusty and faded, but the golden hue shone from underneath in the porch light. I bent down slow, pulling the hefty little thing into my palm, while the gun watched the scene ahead. The thing shone brighter as my thumb wiped the dust from its face, and I read the little letters stamped into it. I was holding a 1-pound gold bar in my hand. A voice called out from the black. "Good day, Crow. You like it?" I didn't jump, but raised my gaze to the tree line and didn't answer. It amazed me how much like a child it sounded. "It's yours. Old money. For you, if you want it." I turned the gun to the direction I thought I'd heard the voice come from. "Why don't you come out, man? I've called the police. You're trespassing and you're going to be arrested." There wasn't a noise. I held the gun there and felt the weight start to strain my shoulder. "I want to try again. Not fair the first time. I want to try again." The voice came from another 10 or so feet from where I had the gun pointed. I shouted back, "Come out!" But in the quiet few moments after, it didn't. I felt the question leave my mouth before I thought better of it. "Who are you?" There were smacking noises coming from it, like it was opening its throat. "You can make another one. You have the money now, and the payment has been set. I want Helen." I leaned back and my face twisted in confusion. Deciding that he was a fine distance away, I slowly backed into the porch chair and sat down, keeping the gun trained while my wrist rested on the arm of the chair. "Come at..." "They'll come back." The voice was wet and hasty, and the guttural squelch of every syllable made my arms erupt into goosebumps. The words echoed across the valley. The trees and the bushes absorbed it, and I felt the vibration buzz in my chest. Maybe I let it get the better of me, and I wouldn't have done it if I was in a better state of mind, but I was pissed. "Who the fuck is Helen, you weirdo?" The voice didn't answer, and I heard shuffling in the branches. I figured we were stuck together anyway, at least until I could get a shot off and send the fella out and down the road with a bullet in his ass. Till then, though, I could maybe humor him and get him in a nice enough position. "I was told I didn't have any neighbors out here. What are you doing all the way out here?" The voice croaked, now 20 feet to the left of where it had been. I think I came up when the jar flies did. No one was home when I woke. I knocked an eyebrow up. Is that so? That big mess at the Clark place is yours? It didn't answer immediately, but when it did, it was far too close for comfort. I'll be taking what I came for, unless you want to see the elephant, friend. I scratched at my temple where a scab had begun to grow and waved the gun to the stranger's new spot in the shadows. Well, I don't know what that is. Yes, I did. And you're not leaving here with shit. What are you anyway? Are you some sort of crackhead? I've seen a few where I'm from, and none of them have eyes like that. Suddenly, a vague shape stepped out of the dark. Footsteps so quiet, movements so silent, that you'd think it was a ghost. The light barely met the front of it, glancing vaguely on its frame. It was standing at the gate, arms at its side. Those eyes, constant and piercing, stared back at me from its face. The lips were still, drops of drool drifting down from the corners of its mouth. I could make out a rigid and skinny pair of arms peeking out from a dirty set of overalls, oily spots marking everywhere that it wasn't worn into threads. The fabric clung to its skin like it had crawled from a pool just moments before, and I saw puddles of fluid growing under its bare toes. I held the gun, pointed straight at him, and couldn't pull the trigger. Not yet. Not seeing that childlike mug staring back at me. But I didn't put it down, keeping it trained on the shape. They didn't come back, I guess. Thought they'd only be gone a couple days when they'd forgiven me. I nudged my chin toward it and shook my head. Don't take one more step, pal. Don't test me with this gun. I'm a lawyer. It stood there quietly, not moving. Its lips parted. I'm being kind. But I wasn't. My finger was flush against the arch, behind the trigger, before I'd even braced myself, and a deafening shot tore into the thing's chest and blew chunks of red flesh into the gravel below. The thing leaned backward, but its feet didn't move. Its back arched away from the wound, but its face remained plain and unaffected. It was as if it hadn't happened at all. The glassy jades drifted down to the palm-sized hole in its chest, the protruding ribs jutting out from the fabric of its shirt like teeth between gums. Then they slowly walk up the length of my body and up to my eyes. There's no twitch or curve in its lips. Its wet face is expressionless and curt. I didn't feel any anger or pain in it, and I hated the disconnection like I was looking at a stone. It stepped back, still twisted in shock. Daddy? Frozen in its contorted pose, it slipped away from the light at an insane speed. Not a stone or piece of dirt moving under its soaking feet before it was gone. I fired 2 more shots into the dark, hearing the wet splat sound of flesh ripping under the force of hot, fast steel. I remember feeling something dripping down my face, and I moved my hand against my forehead to feel cold sweat coming down the bridge of my nose. Suddenly, I had the second to realize my heart was beating out of my chest, and whatever confidence I had in this territorial dispute was suddenly vacant now. I felt like a rabbit in a bear trap, like some ancient prey instinct had just been unlocked from an old memory in my DNA. I hadn't been scared, not when I thought it was only a man. But now, the situation seemed far beyond my ability to maneuver, and I wanted to be very far away, very quickly. It took a slug and walked away without so much as a squeak, and it wanted my son. How could I let Janice come home in just a few hours? Would he still be out there in the daytime? Was I dealing with some silly Bram Stoker pipe dream or something without fairy tales to make up the rules? No, I told myself. It had to be crawling off somewhere to die. In the morning, I'd head out with the sheriff and find a crumbled body in the tall grass, and that would be it. Then I heard glass breaking. I turned with the gun ready and strolled into the house, staring at everything visible under the electric yellow light. It was empty. I stomped my way into the bedroom, scared at the possibility of that thing jumping out at me and sinking those teeth into my skin. The window was shattered, the floor speckled with shards of glass. He'd done it, sure, but there was nowhere to hide in the light. Not after I flipped the mattress over and pointed the gun underneath the bed. I walked through the house, even turning over the cabinets before I stood there in the living room, absolutely bewildered. I sat at the kitchen table, the gun still readily available in my hand. I felt the call of exhaustion cloud my brain and shook it off, staring at every window and out the door, waiting for even a fraction of movement. Is this what I brought my family into? What fresh hell had I slipped the three of us into by taking this damn job? In the shining chrome of the pistol, my own face came back to me, distorted and warped, and yet I still saw my own father in it. They couldn't come home to this, not when I wasn't even sure the gun had done or could do any real damage to the damned thing. I resigned myself to the feeling, letting my attention fall away from the dark and feeling that familiar embrace of self-pity warm my shoulders. Until I heard a squeak. The lights fluttered, then shut off with a loud bang somewhere in the walls. Another tiny noise followed the last, as something fell onto the ground. I looked up. Two green eyes stared at me from the slats in the vent plate, beady pupils dialed right at me. In shock, I yelled and stood, gun pointed straight at the vent. Two explosions rocked out from my hand cannon, and the vent plate exploded into ribbons of jagged shrapnel. But the black mass inside still slipped out all the same. A series of wet snapping sounds came out of the dark, before I saw two legs carry the shape onto the floor. Good day, Crow. The last of my bullets met the hammer, and the explosion blasted my ears numb. A patch of drywall behind the thing's head disintegrated into a cloud of powder, but those damn eyes stared back all the same. I missed. The thing never blinked, looking on me with pupils the size of needleheads. The shadowed bulb of its head seemed to consider the barrel of the gun before lifting again to me. I heard a loud click sound echoing out somewhere in the dark. Then a stream of them came, blending together into a screaming stream. It was like a buzzsaw. I reached down to the dining table, wrapping my fingers around the wooden handle of my trusty kitchen knife. Maybe it was because I was already tired, stressed, or maybe it was because I knew this had to be fixed as soon as possible before my wife saw I made a new window in the ceiling of our new house. But I pulled the knife back. In a fraction of a second, I ran at the thing, screaming as I pushed the knife into its forehead and tackled it to the shag carpet. We slid down the hallway. All the while, I could feel its sticky skin leaving a layer of gooey film on my own. I felt its body size in my arms, writhing in place as hot, bubbling yellow sputtered around the blade of the knife and into the open air. Its hand drifted to my cheek, and I felt the tips of its fingers press into the skin until my flesh parted and its fingers slid into the muscle underneath. I screamed, its open mouth breathing stagnant air into my face. I struggled to my feet so as not to smell the disgusting sweet odor drifting out from between its thin lips any longer, feeling its fingers slip out of my face with a disgusting spurt of red blood. I looked down at the thing, watching one green eye drift away and up into its brain, while the other stayed dead set on my face, and its body jittered and slapped against the ground. Its throat started to click again, the corners of its lips curving upwards in a smile. I wiped at my face and watched as the head of the knife's handle that had skewered it through the forehead started to rise. I was in disbelief, seeing the silver face of the blade become visible under the strange webbed membrane it pulled out with it. The look in its eye gave me the sickening impression that it wanted me to see this, that it was having fun. I spat on its face, slamming the heel of my shoe onto the back of the blade, and I felt the point plummet into the carpeting. With my forearm, I smacked the bathroom door open and stepped inside. I wrenched the cabinet open, pulling a small box of Janice's various ointments and shampoos out, and pulling a canister of hairspray against my chest. I looked down at the thing, pressing down on the nozzle of the can and watching a plume of mist kiss against the surface of the thing's body. And I didn't stop spraying until the damn thing was empty. I fumbled around in my jean pocket for my book of matches, feeling the thick paper packet on my palm, and frantically, I snapped off a match and scraped it against the striker. Suddenly, a glowing flame erupted from the red tip of the match, and I smiled, pinning it against its friends in the packet and feeling hot magnesium fire singe the flesh of my palm. The smell, in the moment, filled me with a sense of victory, I think. Especially when the bundle of orange flames fell onto the chest of the thing, and I watched its overalls ignite. The fire crawled from the fabric and onto its skin, soaking up the hairspray that clung to its arms and neck. Light danced against the thing's face, and its spasms worsened. The air outside was cool, and as the flames leapt out the windows of the double-wide, shattering glass and wrinkling the steel, I remember smiling. The trailer roared with the sound of crisping fabric and wood, and in the warm red light I was finally able to breathe. Janice would be absolutely livid, and the sheriff might have rescheduled his dinner invitation in lieu of shoving me into the back of his patrol car. But finally, the woods felt a tiny bit more like home. And standing there, leaning against the fence gate, even now I'm in awe a little bit. When I first saw something moving through the windows, I thought it was nothing. It wasn't until I saw those shrimpy shoulders in that skinny frame stepping forward from the flames that I truly felt fear. One leg moved in front of the other, wrapped from head to foot in curling tongues of fire. When the nightmares came in the weeks after, they repeated that image to me like a tape on rewind. It stood on the porch, paused. Then it walked down the steps, and I remember sifting through the fire around its face, searching for those stupid green eyes and that smirk. But there was only char and hot red light. As its bare feet met the gravel, it simply stopped. Late. Now. Crow. The voice was forced and grating. I heard each word simmer and sputter from its charcoal maw. I had nothing left to meet it with. No hope in hell to try again. I hate to think now that I would have just let it kill me. But hindsight is 20/20. Be seeing you. Then it walked away. Slow steps, out through the tree line and into nothing. The smoke signaled its path above the tree line, until it didn't. It was gone. It wasn't till I'd felt that soft touch on my shoulder that I woke up that morning. In that bright sunlight, I looked up to see Janice's face staring down at me. She helped me up from the dirt, touching my face and comforting me. Her eyes were bright, and her skin was beautiful, and I just stared back in awe of her. On the car ride to the hospital, her words were worried and soft, and you couldn't hear a hint of anger in them. I remember she joked that I must have lost my mind, sitting there smiling at her like I was riding a high. In a way, I guess I was. Seeing her there, looking at the woman I loved, as she argued with nurses and held my hand in the hospital bed, it all finally made sense. I felt held, and I felt solid for the first time in a long time. The doctors asked their questions, and I gave them the same answers that I gave Grant when he sat across from me, pinching the crook of his nose with both eyes closed in frustration. Hell of a housewarming party, Mr. Thornhill. Sure was, buddy. I asked him about the Clark Castle, about the people that had lived there. He just waved it off with the bottom of a cup of coffee slipping past his mustache. They were just some old family from an old time, that was all. They had built the house back when his grandpa was a kid, A wealthier family from the south had moved up and wanted to set up roots. A husband, a wife, and 2 children, a boy and a girl. They kept to themselves. Nobody liked them particularly. The family didn't last long. Something had gone on some years after the oldest had grown a bit, but nobody saw either before the parents picked up shop and shipped off. He said that his grandpa thought they were weirdos, seeing as nobody really saw them around town, besides when the parents would pick up groceries or something like that. That was old news now, he said. I asked him about missing folks, about vagrants and murderers or anything else, but he said that the town was usually very quiet. Stuff like that only comes in waves, he said. They searched for the man for a couple of weeks, but never came up with anything besides that little skeleton in the cradle. When I was up and walking, I came down to the office, but the only thing they knew about it was that it was old. And that was that. But he had to hound me for a while afterwards when the insurance company set a man down for the claim. I never did get that sorted out. It wasn't fulfilled, of course. Arson by the owner in a case of self-defense isn't an easy case to win. But that was alright by me, seeing as that little gold bar was still sitting in my pocket. I found the process of selling it wasn't terribly hard, and 30 grand went a long way in 76. I did worry about the boy for a while. Drove him to and home from school till he moved out and went to Eugene for college. Shane still probably believes me when I tell him someone broke in and just burned the house down in a robbery gone bad. He grew up just fine, I think, and lives downtown in an apartment with my grandson. Janice is still beautiful and is still giving me shit whenever she buys hairspray. I think she knew for a while that the whole thing bothered me. Little spats of nightmares would plague me for a few weeks afterwards. Hell, and that's when I wasn't up all night with a gun at the ready. But a year went by, and then another. She never told me she thought there might be more to the story, but I'll wager she absolutely knew. It was a kindness that she didn't ask too much. There wasn't much to argue about after that. Not a day went by that I wasn't just grateful that she was there, that Shane could sleep safe, that I had them. If it meant bending the knee whenever Janice got a parking ticket or forgot to iron a shirt, I'd happily do so. That's about it. I don't think about it often, but when I do, I get scared. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it died out there, and I would bet against it. The worst part of me believes it's just sleeping. It came up when the jar flies did, right? But it never came back, and that bothers me. I've seen kids go missing in the years since. Posters up on telephone poles. Shit, I joined a lot of those search parties. Always in the back of my mind were those eyes. I always expected to hear those words call out from the pines. Hello, Crow. But it didn't happen. They tore down the Clark Castle a few years ago. I was there, and had been counting the days until I'd seen that behemoth bulldozer knock those tattered walls back into the earth. dust to dust. With it gone, surveying the ravine below, I do remember staring down at that big old drainage pipe. Just thinking about it. Maybe waiting to hear that cicada noise rip out of the dark. But things ended up okay. Lots of things go on all around, sure. But nothing happened to Janice, and nothing happened to Shane. And that's what I choose to take away from all of it. Go ahead and put this online if you want. I'm sure you've done some work changing names and stuff. Thanks for the therapy session, buddy. Afterward. Hello, Sam here. I was disappointed to find a general lack of record keeping with trying to sift through the town's census for all those years before Mr. Thornhill moved to town. He was right about the Clark Castle. The building was torn down in 2018, and even then it was a shell of what it had been on that night in '76. I've taken a couple drives out that way, and I've seen the ravine and the sewer outlet. It's unused, evidenced by the bone-dry soil under the drain. I thought about taking a flashlight and trying my luck in there, but couldn't find any reason to do so. The person that attacked Mr. Thornhill was just a strange young man, right? There's no reason to go searching for something when it shouldn't exist, right? Anyway, even if I did believe the Thornhill report and its quotes from the stranger, there's nothing on file about the Clark children, except maybe the littlest one. All those years after her family had abandoned their roost, shortly after that night, there appears to be only one update. I guess there was only one idea as to who that little body could have been. Little Helen Clark's body was buried in the Faraday Cemetery in 1977, laid to rest where her big brother may never hurt her again. It Came from the Swamp by B.W. Byers, 2233. The story you're about to read is 100% true. The only things changed are names and locations have been removed. This isn't a joke. This isn't a gimmick. This story happened to my father. Before he passed away, he would tell this story to anyone who would sit down around a warm fire on a cold night. The body of this story is written in first person, as though my dad himself was telling it to you. Although it pains me that I'll never hear him tell this story again, it brings me great joy to share this with you. I always loved hearing my father tell this story, and I hope you enjoy it as well. So get comfortable, turn your lights off, and imagine with me that you're sitting next to me around a campfire, listening to my father tell us of his haunting tale. This story takes place in the autumn of 1977 at a camp that belonged to a friend of mine named Dave. I worked with Dave at Fisher Body, one of the automobile factories owned by General Motors. Dave had a camp in a swampy area and had agreed to let me bear hunt out of it. I wasn't alone on this bear hunting trip. My companions were my wife Sarah, little sister Whitney, and her husband Clive, and my hunting buddy Rick. There are many stories I could tell you about, but I will refrain. Both Rick and I brought our bear hounds with us. The hounds pick up a scent and run the bear until it trees, and then the hunters move in towards the tree for the kill. Bears have been known to kill or injure many a dog when they come out of the tree. But I've been very successful hunting bears in the UP, and by God's grace, I've never lost a single dog. Enough of that. Let's get to the tale. Bear season opened September 10th, and we were up for a 2-week hunt. We had gone bear hunting that morning, and we run a bear, but it avoided us. So we went back to the camp. There was me, Rick, Clive, Whitney, and Sarah. Me, Rick, and Clive were sitting there, and we got up and started a fire. We just sat around chit-chatting while the girls were in the cabin making dinner from a raccoon Rick had shot the day before. We had our hounds, and just before the girls called us in, all of my dogs I had tied up around the edge of the swamp jumped up and went right to the end of their chain and started barking at the swamp. We were looking down there, but it was just dark enough to where we couldn't see anything. Then, all at once, every dog went back to the tree I had them tied to and laid down, except one. They were all shaking and shivering, except for that one dog, that little shotgun. She was my little blue tick hound. She finally laid down, but she didn't act so scared as the others. Every one of Rick's dogs ran right in their doghouse. It was the strangest thing. If it had been a bear, they wouldn't have acted like that. They would have wanted to get after it. We went ahead and went in and had dinner. Then we went back out that night and had the fire going while we sat around and talked about the events of the day. The girls made dessert and called us in, so we went in and played euchre. That's what we play in Michigan. It was really warm for September that day, and after we got done playing cards, we all got ready for bed. We never thought about latching the screen door because of just how hot it was that night. So we went to bed, and in the morning, I heard the screen door open. And at 1 a.m., I heard the screen door squeak open and then thump shut. I heard something open, and I heard it stirring in the kitchen. The cabin was just 2 rooms. The dining room and bedroom were just one big room, and there was also a living room. There was no electricity, so it had a gas lantern hanging from the ceiling that hung down about a foot. The only other source of light came from the full moon coming in through a big picture window. There was a full-size bunk bed, and Rick was in the top bunk, and Sarah and I were in the bottom. You could see almost like daylight in the kitchen, and all at once I could hear something moving around. Whatever made the noise walked right in front of the table and turned just like it knew right where we were. It was standing right under the light, and it was humped over so it wouldn't hit its head on the light. Its arms were hanging down. They seemed like they were way past its knees because it was bent over. It was just standing here, staring at us. It looked right at me, and then I raised up on one elbow and was watching it. At first, I thought it was a bear, but then I realized it couldn't be because of its ears. I could see plain as day. They were on the side of its head like a human, not on the top like a bear. It just stood there staring at us. Every one of our guns were out in the trucks. We never had a gun in the cabin, which was probably a good thing. If I had tried and failed to get to a gun, we all might have gotten killed. I just laid there, and it just kept staring at us. But it would just stand there. It would move his head and shift itself, but then it would just keep staring at us. and my dogs were outside just whining and carrying on, scared to death. If it would have been a bear, they would have been going nuts, but they were just whining. I had a big 8-cell battery flashlight that we would sit between the bunk bed and the day bed. It was there just in case someone had to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. They could just reach down there and get that light. It wasn't there. It was always there. I was gonna turn it on. I wanted to know exactly what it was. I didn't know whether Whitney had gotten it and went out earlier to go to the bathroom and didn't put it back or what, because it was always put in that one spot. It just watched me while I was reaching around. That's when I thought to myself, we were all Christians, so if he attacks, we would be fine. He stood between us and the only door out of the cabin. We would have had to go through him or around him. There was no other way out of there. Finally, I pretended like I was sleeping in an effort to make it go away. When I opened my eyes to take another peek, I saw that it had moved towards us. It was only about 5 feet from where I was laying. I started to panic and was getting ready to start fighting if I needed to, but then I heard the screen door open and thump shut. The dogs were just scared to death, but it never seemed to bother any of the dogs. It just left. So I just laid there. I couldn't go back to sleep. I just held my breath and prayed that it wasn't coming back. After I was sure whatever it was wasn't coming back, I slipped out of bed and crept over to the doorway. When I looked out into the night, I saw it peeking at me from around my truck. My blood ran ice cold, and I quickly, yet quietly, closed the main door and deadbolted it shut. Around 2:30 a.m., my sister Whitney woke up and had to go pee. She came over to me and said, Wyatt, what in the world is wrong with those dogs?" Trying not to cause a panic, I lied and said, "I don't know. Why?" She said, "Just listen to them. They're out there crying. There's something wrong." After a long and probably suspicious pause, she said, "I really have to pee. Will you walk out to the toilet with me?" Wanting to do literally anything other than that, I said, "Yeah, sure I will." I reached out for the flashlight again, and I asked, "Where's that flashlight? I usually keep it right here." And she said, "Oh, I put it on the nightstand." And I reached over, and instead of putting it between the beds, she had set it on the nightstand. She pointed at the nightstand and said, I just set it up there. Figured it made more sense than having it between the beds where it can get lost." And probably for a good reason. There's no telling what might have happened if I pointed a flashlight at that thing. But anyway, I walked her out. I walked her and she took the flashlight, and I stood halfway between the outhouse and the cabin. She went to the bathroom and we came back in. The dogs were still all shook up. She shook her head and said, "I wonder what's going on. Something has them all shook up." Well, I didn't want to tell her anything. I was the only one that saw it, and as far as I could tell, we were safe now. Then, off in the distance, I heard a snap of a branch or something. Wendy stopped and asked, "What is going on, Wyatt?" I assured her it was just a raccoon, and we went back inside and back to bed. She gave me a curious look when I deadbolted the door, but she didn't say anything. By the time we'd got back to our beds, the dogs had settled down a bit. I took that as proof that we were going to be okay. I slept a little, and I got up about 5 in the morning because we like to leave at daybreak to go out looking for bear tracks. I started breakfast while the others woke up. We had eggs, potatoes, and some breakfast sausage. I started it, but Sarah finished making it. While they finished making breakfast, I put the dogs in the dog boxes on my truck. After breakfast, about 5:30 a.m., we all headed out. Whitney and Clive were in their truck, and the rest were with me in my truck. Dave had a cable across his drive, and after we got through the cable, down the trail about 300 yards, I got my dog Sport out. I would always put one dog down out in front of the truck and just drive slowly behind him as he went down the trail. He would go after the bear, and I would jump out of the truck and get the other dogs out and send them after him. We went down this one game trail, and he acted squirrely, like he didn't want to. He usually would drift back and forth, but this time he stayed right in front of the truck. He would go down a ways, and he'd stop and look back at me, nervous as a cat in a dog kennel. We walked this game trail all the way back to the highway where Rick and Sarah met us, and I got him and loaded him back into the truck. Then we went south on the highway toward the cabin about 3/4 of a mile and turned left on a trail that headed toward a lake that we knew bears liked to hang around. There was a big cherry tree that the bears couldn't resist. At that time of the year, they are dead ripe, and the bears were getting fattened up for hibernation. I went over to the cherry orchard and took Sport all through there looking for tracks on a scent trail. We almost always would start a bear in there, and he just didn't act right, so I loaded him back up in the truck. We went back down the road and turned south about 1/8 of a mile to another little trail. When we went, there was a little lake that I mentioned. I loaded him back up and drove northeast around the lake because it was a bit too bulky for me. When I got him back out, he caught a whiff of something and he froze in his tracks. He smelled something he really didn't like, but after some coaxing, I got him to keep going. So, in the meantime, I'm sitting on the hood of the truck so I can watch him better, and Sandra was driving the truck. So I had her stop and I slid off the truck, and I started walking with Sport. Sport went down this trail and I walked down the trail behind him. The trail comes to a point on the back side of the lake. The swamp ran all the way from the cabin down to the lake. I followed him all the way to the end of that trail, and he came to the end of that point and threw his nose up in the air and just stopped. And he just froze, staring down at the lake. He kind of growled a little bit, and all the hair jumped up from his tail to his nose. It just bristled right up, and he just stood there, staring down into the swamp. I started looking down where he was staring, but I couldn't see whatever he could. He looked at me, and he just turned around and started back toward the truck, stiff-legged and breathless. I followed Sport, walking just as hard as I could go. I just knew that he saw something bad. The hair on the back of my neck stood up because I knew that if it had been a bear, Sport would have gone right down there after it. He headed right back to the truck, and I had the tailgate down on the truck. When we got close to the truck, he took off running and he jumped right into the truck and began trying his hardest to get into the dog box with my other dogs. I still hadn't told Rick and them anything about the night before, but I was beginning to think that I ought to. That evening, after we got back to the cabin, I told everyone what had happened the night before. Whitney was immediately angry and wanted to go home, and I said, "It never bothered us. It came in the cabin, but we'll make sure we shut the doors now." It just stood there looking at us. And anyway, we stayed up there. We had another full week to hunt. As far as I know, it never bothered us anymore, and I never bothered it. If I would have turned on that flashlight, there is no telling what might have happened. 4 months later, while on Dave and my lunch break at Fisher Body, he told me that he went back up to his cabin for a weekend getaway. When he got there, he saw that his cabin had been broken into and trashed. The only thing in there that wasn't ruined was on the bottom bunk, the bunk that Sarah and I were sleeping on. I didn't tell him about the experience I had, but I knew that whatever that thing was had broken in. I'm not sure what it wanted with us, nor why it went out of its way to deliberately preserve where I was sleeping. After all these years of telling this story to my friends, children, and grandchildren, I still don't know what it was. And I pray to God that I never find out.